In 1876, a flash flood roared through Arizona territory, swallowing everything in its path. A young mother and her baby were trapped in a wagon, seconds from drowning. A lone cowboy saw them disappearing into the churning water, and he did the unthinkable. He dove from his galloping horse straight into the flood. What happened next would change 3 lives forever. Stay with me until the end of this story and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far this tale has traveled. The sky had been clear that morning. Clara Winslow remembered that with painful clarity, the way the sun had painted the red rocks gold, the way baby June had cooed at the hawks circling overhead, the way the wagon driver, old Tom Breslin, had whistled a cheerful tune as the wheels creaked along the dusty trail through Winding Creek Valley. She should have known better. Anyone who'd spent more than a season in Arizona territory knew that clear skies meant nothing. The storms could be 20 miles away, invisible beyond the mountains, and still send walls of water crashing through the dry arroyos without warning. But Clara was new to this land, only 6 months in the territory, and most of that time spent in the relative safety of Tucson, waiting for her sister's letter saying it was safe to come north. That letter had arrived 3 weeks ago. "Come now," Maggie had written in her neat, careful hand. "The homestead is ready. We have a room for you in June. Thomas has built everything strong. You'll be safe here." Safe. Clara had clung to that word like a prayer as she'd packed their meager belongings, as she'd paid Tom Breslin the last of her savings to drive them the 100 miles north to Silver Ridge, as she'd wrapped June in every blanket she owned against the October chill. Now, as the wagon tilted sickeningly to one side and water exploded over the creek bank in a roaring brown wall, that word seemed like the cruelest joke God had ever told. "Hold on!" Tom's shout barely carried over the sudden thunder of the flood. The horses screamed, their eyes rolling white with terror as the water hit them chest high. The wagon lurched violently, and Clara felt her stomach drop as the wheels left the ground. She clutched June to her chest, wrapping both arms around the baby as the wagon spun in the current. June was crying now, her little face red and scrunched, her tiny fists beating against Clara's sodden dress. The sound of her daughter's screams cut through Clara's terror and sharpened it into something cold and focused. Keep her head above water. Whatever happens, keep her head above water. "Tom!" Clara screamed, but the driver's seat was empty. She caught a glimpse of his brown hat tumbling in the current, already 50 yards downstream, but no sign of the man himself. The horses were fighting their traces, pulling in opposite directions, and the wagon was spinning faster now, caught in the full force of the flood. Water poured over the side, soaking through Clara's dress, her petticoats, everything. It was shockingly cold, snowmelt from the mountains, she realized dimly, and it stole the breath from her lungs. June's cries were weakening, and Clara clutched her tighter, trying to shield her from the spray, from the debris that smashed against the wagon sides. A tree branch as thick as a man's leg slammed into the wagon with a crack like a gunshot. The impact threw Clara backward, and she felt the wagon bed split beneath her. Water rushed up through the crack, and she scrambled onto the driver's seat, holding June above her head as the wagon began to break apart. "Please," she sobbed, though she didn't know who she was begging. "Please, please, please." The wagon hit something solid, a boulder maybe, or a submerged tree, and the jolt nearly threw her into the water. Clara's fingers dug into the wooden seat so hard her nails bent backward, and she pressed June against her shoulder, turning her back to the worst of the current. She was going to die here. They both were. Her baby, her beautiful, perfect June, who had her father's dark eyes and her own stubborn chin, would drown before she ever learned to walk, to talk, to live. And Clara would die knowing she'd failed to protect her, failed to give her the life she'd promised when she'd held her for the first time and whispered, "I'll keep you safe. Always." The wagon gave another sickening lurch, and Clara felt the whole structure beginning to tip. The current had shifted, pushing them toward the far bank where the water churned against a stand of cottonwood trees. In seconds, they'd be crushed against those trunks, or the wagon would capsize completely and they'd be swept under. Clara closed her eyes and pressed her lips to June's wet hair. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you so much, baby girl. I'm so sorry." Then she heard it. Hoofbeats, impossibly loud even over the roar of the flood. Her eyes flew open and she saw him. A rider, coming down the slope at a full gallop, his horse's hooves throwing up clouds of red dust. He was hunched low over the animal's neck, his dark hat pulled tight, and he was riding straight for the flood. "No!" Clara screamed, though she didn't know if she was warning him or begging him to save them. "No, don't!" But the rider didn't slow. If anything, he urged his horse faster, and Clara watched in disbelief as the big bay stallion plunged into the churning water without hesitation. The current hit them immediately, trying to sweep the horse downstream, but the rider held firm, guiding the animal across the current at an angle. For a moment, Clara thought they might make it. The horse was strong, fighting the water with powerful strokes, and the rider seemed to know exactly where to aim. But then the wagon gave another violent spin, and Clara lost sight of them behind a spray of water and debris. When she looked again, the horse was 20 feet away, struggling to keep its head above water as the current pushed it downstream. And the rider was gone. Clara's heart plummeted. He'd been thrown. He'd tried to save them, and now he was drowning too, and it was her fault. Her fault. Then she saw him. He surfaced 10 feet from the wagon, his hat gone, his dark hair plastered to his head. For one brief moment their eyes met. His were a startling pale gray, clear even through the spray. And then he was swimming toward her with strong, powerful strokes that cut through the current. He reached the wagon just as it began to tip. His hand shot out and grabbed the side rail, and the impact steadied the whole structure for a precious few seconds. Clara saw his face clearly now, sharp cheekbones, a dark beard, a long scar cutting through his left eyebrow. And then he was pulling himself up, water streaming from his clothes. "Give me the baby!" he shouted. Clara's arms tightened instinctively around June. Every maternal instinct screamed at her not to let go, not to trust this stranger, not to give up the only thing in the world that mattered. But the wagon was breaking apart beneath her feet. She could feel the boards splintering, could hear the nails shrieking as they pulled free. In seconds, there would be nothing left to hold on to. "Now!" the man shouted again, and he stretched out his arms. Clara looked at his face, at the determination in those gray eyes, at the way his jaw was set, at the strength in his shoulders as he braced himself against the wagon's rail. She looked at her baby, at June's terrified little face, at the way her daughter's fingers were tangled in the wet fabric of her dress. Then she made a choice. She lifted June, kissed her forehead one more time, and placed her in the stranger's arms. He took the baby with surprising gentleness, tucking her immediately inside his heavy canvas jacket and buttoning it closed so only her face showed. Then he grabbed Clara's wrist with his free hand. "We're going to jump," he said, and his voice was calm, steady, as if they were discussing the weather instead of staring death in the face. "On 3. Keep your legs together, keep your arms wrapped around me, and don't let go no matter what." "I can't swim," Clara gasped. Something that might have been a smile flickered across his face. "Good thing I can. 1. The wagon lurched again, and Clara felt the seat split completely beneath her. 2. She grabbed onto his shoulders, her fingers digging into the wet fabric of his shirt. 3. They jumped together, and the world exploded into cold and chaos. The current grabbed them immediately, trying to rip them apart. Clara felt her grip slipping, felt the water trying to tear her away from the man and the baby, but she held on with every ounce of strength she had. Her lungs burned. Her legs tangled in her skirts. Everything was brown water and roaring noise, and the terrible certainty that she'd made a mistake, that she should have held on to June herself, that her baby was going to die in a stranger's arms. Then her head broke the surface, and she gasped in a desperate breath. The man had one arm wrapped around her waist, holding her against his side, while his other arm cradled June against his chest. He was swimming with just his legs, powerful kicks that drove them across the current at an angle. "Don't fight it," he shouted. "Let the water carry us downstream. I'm aiming for that sandbar." Clara tried to see where he was pointing, but water kept washing over her face. She coughed, choked, and felt herself starting to panic. Her dress was so heavy, pulling her down, and her arms were shaking from exhaustion. "Look at me." The man's voice cut through her terror. "Eyes on me. Breathe when I tell you to breathe." She focused on his face, on those steady gray eyes. "Breathe," he commanded, and she gulped in air. A wave washed over them, and he held her tighter. When they surfaced again, he said, Breathe. She did. They continued like that, him shouting commands, her following them, and slowly the panic receded. She could see the sandbar now, a strip of pale brown 40 feet ahead. The man kicked harder, adjusting their angle, and Clara felt the current beginning to weaken as they moved into shallower water. Her foot touched bottom. Then her knees hit sand and the man was pulling her upright, supporting her as she struggled to stand in water that was only chest deep now. Together they waded toward the sandbar, fighting the current with every step. When they finally collapsed onto dry ground, Clara couldn't move. She lay on her side, coughing up water, her whole body shaking so hard her teeth rattled. Dimly, she was aware of the man moving beside her, of the sound of him unbuttoning his jacket, and then, "Mama?" The word, her daughter's voice, weak but alive, cut through everything else. Clara rolled onto her hands and knees and saw the man cradling June, checking her carefully, his big hands impossibly gentle as he made sure she was breathing, uninjured, whole. June was crying, but it was the strong, angry cry of a healthy baby who'd been frightened and soaked and wanted her mother right now. It was the most beautiful sound Clara had ever heard. "She's all right," the man said, and Clara heard the relief in his voice. Cold and scared, but not hurt. "Here." He placed June in Clara's arms, and Clara clutched her daughter to her chest, sobbing so hard she couldn't breathe. She pressed her face against June's wet hair and just held her, feeling the baby's heart beating against her own, feeling the rise and fall of those tiny lungs, feeling the warmth of her breath. "Thank you," she gasped between sobs. "Thank you, thank you, thank you." "Save your breath," the man said quietly. He stood, looking back at the flood. The water was already starting to recede, dropping as quickly as it had risen, leaving a landscape of mud and destruction in its wake. Clara could see the shattered remains of the wagon hung up in the cottonwoods downstream, the horses nowhere in sight. Tom Breslin was gone. Everything she'd owned was gone. They were stranded in the middle of the Arizona wilderness with nothing but the clothes on their backs and the kindness of a stranger. The man whistled sharply, 2 long notes that carried over the rushing water. Clara watched in amazement as the big bay horse emerged from the far side of the flood, shaking itself like a dog. The animal picked its way carefully across the receding water and climbed onto the sandbar, immediately moving to its rider's side. "Good boy, Thunder," the man murmured, running his hand down the horse's neck. Then he turned to Clara. "Can you ride?" Clara looked at him blankly. Her brain felt slow, waterlogged. What? "Can you ride a horse?" he repeated patiently. "We need to get you and the baby somewhere warm and dry before nightfall. My ranch is 3 miles north. It's the closest shelter." "I can ride," Clara managed. She'd learned as a girl, though it had been years since she'd sat a horse. "But June, I'll hold her." He held out his arms. "You'll ride in front. I'll ride behind and keep you both steady. We'll take it slow." Clara hesitated. The man seemed to read her thoughts because he said very gently, "Ma'am, I just pulled you out of a flood. If I meant you harm, I could have let you drown. My name's Rowan Hale. I've got a ranch 3 miles from here and an old man named Santos who'll feed you beans and lecture me for bringing you in soaked. You're safe. I give you my word." There was something in his eyes when he said it, a quiet certainty, a bone-deep honor. That made Clara believe him. She nodded slowly and let him take June again. Getting onto the horse was harder than she'd expected. Her legs were shaking, her dress weighed 100 pounds, and she could barely pull herself into the saddle. Rowan had to help her, his hands impersonal and steady as he lifted her up. Then he mounted behind her in one smooth motion, settling June in the crook of his left arm while his right arm went around Clara's waist to hold the reins. "Lean back against me," he said. "I've got you both." Clara was too exhausted to argue. She let herself sag back against his chest, felt the solid warmth of him behind her, and closed her eyes as Thunder began to walk. The ride to the ranch passed in a blur. Clara kept drifting in and out of awareness. One moment she was conscious of the horse's movement beneath her. The next she was slipping into darkness. Every time she started to fall, Rowan's arm tightened around her waist, holding her in place. "Stay with me," he murmured once, his voice close to her ear. "Just a little further." She tried. She focused on June's breathing, on the feel of Rowan's heartbeat steady against her back. On the way, the afternoon sun was finally breaking through the clouds. She focused on staying alive. When they finally arrived at the ranch, Clara had just enough awareness to register a small adobe house, a barn, corrals, and an old Mexican man who came hurrying out with an expression of alarm. Dios mío! Rowan, what happened? Flash flood, Rowan said tersely, dismounting with June still cradled in his arm. Get the fire going, Santos. Hot water, blankets, and see if you can find any of Maria's old clothes. Maria's been gone 5 years. I know. Check the chest in the back room. Clara tried to dismount by herself and nearly fell. Rowan caught her with his free arm, steadying her, and she found herself looking up into those gray eyes again. Easy, he said. Santos, help me get her inside. The old man hurried over, and together they half-carried Clara into the house. The interior was simple. Whitewashed walls, a stone fireplace, rough-hewn furniture, but it was warm and dry and safe. Clara sank onto a bench by the fire and watched dully as Santos bustled around, stoking the flames, hanging a pot of water to heat. Rowan still held June, rocking her gently as the baby's cries finally quieted to hiccuping whimpers. He looked comfortable with her, Clara noted distantly. Natural, as if he held babies every day, though something about this house suggested he lived alone except for the old man. What's her name? Rowan asked quietly. June, Clara whispered. Her name is June. June, he repeated and smiled down at the baby. That's a good strong name. You're a brave girl, June. Your mama, too. Tears started flowing down Clara's face again, and she couldn't stop them. The warmth of the fire, the safety of these walls, the sheer overwhelming relief of being alive. It all crashed over her at once, and she put her face in her hands and wept. She felt someone drape a blanket around her shoulders, heard Santos muttering in Spanish as he moved around the room. Then Rowan was crouching in front of her, June still in his arms. You're safe now, he said, and there was such certainty in his voice that Clara believed him. Both of you. I promise. Clara looked at him through her tears, at this stranger who'd dove off a galloping horse into a flood, who'd carried them both to safety, who was holding her baby with such gentle care, and managed to nod. Thank you, she whispered again. Rowan's expression softened. Rest now. We'll talk when you're warm and dry. He stood and carried June toward the fire, settling into a rocking chair with the baby still bundled against his chest. Clara watched through heavy-lidded eyes as he rocked slowly, murmuring something too quiet for her to hear, while Santos brought her a cup of hot tea and insisted she drink. The tea warmed her from the inside out. The fire warmed her from the outside in. And slowly, so slowly, Clara felt the bone-deep cold beginning to leave her body. She must have dozed, because the next thing she knew, Santos was touching her shoulder gently. Señora, he said, I have found some clothes for you. Come, you must get out of these wet things before you catch your death. Clara followed him in a daze to a small bedroom, where he'd laid out a simple dress, stockings, and a shawl. The clothes smelled of cedar and dust, as if they'd been packed away for years, but they were dry and clean. I will stay with the little one, Santos assured her. Take your time. Clara changed quickly, her fingers clumsy on the buttons. The dress was too large. She'd lost weight in the months since Daniel had died, and she'd never been a big woman to begin with. But the shawl helped, and the dry clothes felt like heaven. When she emerged, she found Santos holding June while Rowan had disappeared. The old man smiled at her. Better, see? You have color in your face now. Sit, sit. I have made soup. Clara sank back onto the bench and accepted the bowl he offered. The soup was simple, beans and salt pork and peppers, but it was hot and savory, and she hadn't realized how hungry she was until the first spoonful hit her stomach. Where's Mr. Hale? She asked between bites. Seeing to thunder and checking the flood damage, Santos said. He will be back soon. That man, he cannot sit still for 5 minutes, always working, always moving. But today he did something I have never seen. He dove into that flood without thinking twice, didn't he? Clara nodded, swallowing hard. He saved our lives. That is Rowan, Santos said, his weathered face fond. He acts like he wants to be alone, like he doesn't need anyone. but put someone in danger, and he cannot help himself. He has to save them. The old man looked down at June, who had fallen asleep in his arms. This little one, she is special, I think. Rowan, he looked at her like she matters, like she is worth saving. Every baby is worth saving, Clara said quietly. See, of course. But Rowan, he has lost much. His wife, his son, a fever 5 years ago. Since then, he has been alone. By choice, you understand? But today, holding your little June, I saw something in his eyes I have not seen in a long time. Clara's chest tightened. She'd been so focused on her own grief, on surviving each day with June after Daniel's death, that she hadn't considered that the man who'd saved them might be carrying his own scars. The door opened and Rowan stepped inside, bringing a gust of cool evening air with him. He'd changed into dry clothes, dark trousers, a clean shirt, his hair still damp but combed back from his face. Without the wet jacket and the desperation of the flood, Clara could see him clearly for the first time. He was tall, lean, but strong, probably in his early 30s. The scar through his eyebrow gave him a dangerous look, but his eyes were kind. Tired, Clara thought. There was a bone-deep weariness in those eyes that had nothing to do with physical exhaustion. "How are you feeling?" he asked, moving to hang his hat by the door. "Better," Clara said. "Thanks to you and Santos. I don't know how to repay—" "No need," Rowan interrupted quietly. He crossed to where Santos sat with June and gazed down at the sleeping baby. "She all right?" "Sleeping like an angel," Santos confirmed. "This little one, she is strong." "Takes after her mama," Rowan said, and his eyes met Clara's. "You were brave out there. Most people would have frozen." Clara shook her head. "I was terrified." "Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do what needs doing anyway." He pulled up a chair and sat, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "Now, when you're ready, I need to know where you are headed, and whether anyone will come looking for you." Clara took a breath, organizing her scattered thoughts. "My sister," she said. "Maggie Duncan. She and her husband Thomas have a homestead near Silver Ridge. I was traveling there with my daughter. Our driver, Tom Breslin." "I saw him go under," Rowan said gently. "I'm sorry." Clara's eyes burned, but she had no more tears left. She'd barely known Tom, had hired him only 3 days ago in Tucson, but he'd seemed kind. He'd told her stories about his grandchildren, had whistled cheerful tunes to make June laugh. Now he was gone, swept away in seconds. "My sister will be expecting me," she continued. "We were supposed to arrive before nightfall. When we don't come, she'll worry. She'll send Thomas looking." Rowan nodded slowly. "Silver Ridge is 20 miles north. The flood took you 5 miles downstream from where you started, which means you were on the Old Creek Road. That puts your sister's place, 25 miles from here?" "I don't know," Clara admitted. "I'm not familiar with the area." "I am," Santos interjected. "The Duncan homestead. It is northwest of here, perhaps 24 miles. A day's ride, if you know the way." "Tomorrow," Rowan decided. "Soon as it's light, I'll take you to your sister's. Tonight you rest. Build up your strength. You've had a hell of a day." Clara wanted to protest, to say she couldn't impose any further, but the truth was she could barely keep her eyes open. The warmth of the fire, the food in her belly, the sheer relief of being safe. It was pulling her under like a tide. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." Rowan stood and took June carefully from Santos, cradling her with practiced ease. "Come on," he said to Clara. "I'll show you where you'll sleep." Clara followed him down a short hallway to a small bedroom. The bed was simple, a wooden frame, a cornhusk mattress, quilts piled high, but it looked like paradise. Rowan laid June carefully in the center of the bed, tucking blankets around her to keep her from rolling. "Santos will bring you anything else you need," he said. "Water, food, extra blankets. You just rest." He turned to leave, but Clara caught his sleeve. "Mr. Hale," she said, "why did you do it? Why did you risk your life for strangers?" Rowan was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. "Because I couldn't save them," he said. "My wife and son. I couldn't save them when the fever came. So when I saw you and your daughter in that water, he stopped, cleared his throat. I had to try. Clara's heart broke for him. She wanted to say something, anything that might ease the pain in his eyes. But what words existed for that kind of loss? You did save us, she said finally. You saved June. You gave her a future. Rowan looked at the sleeping baby, and something soft crossed his face. Get some rest, Mrs. Winslow. Tomorrow's a long ride. He left, closing the door quietly behind him, and Clara crawled onto the bed beside her daughter. She curled around June's small body, one hand resting protectively on the baby's chest, feeling the steady rise and fall of breath. They were alive. Against all odds, they were alive. Outside, she could hear the murmur of men's voices as Rowan and Santos talked by the fire. The sound was comforting, as was the crackle of flames and the distant sound of horses in the corral. For the first time since Daniel had died, Clara felt something other than grief and fear. She felt gratitude, hope, the sense that maybe, just maybe, she and June would be all right. She closed her eyes and let sleep take her. But she didn't know, couldn't know, that the flood had washed them into more than just Rowan Hale's life. It had washed them into the middle of a range war, into the path of a ruthless man who wanted her sister's land and would use Clara's presence to get it. The flood hadn't been the end of their troubles. It had only been the beginning. Clara woke to the sound of a baby crying and sunlight streaming through a gap in the curtains. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was. The unfamiliar room, the rough wool blanket, the smell of wood smoke and coffee. Then it all came rushing back. The flood, the wagon. Rowan Hale diving into the water. She sat up quickly, reaching for June, who was red-faced and wailing. The baby's diaper was soaked through, and Clara's heart sank as she realized she had nothing. No spare clothes, no diapers, no supplies at all. Everything had been in the wagon. There was a soft knock at the door, and Santos's voice called, "Señora, may I come in?" "Yes," Clara said, trying to soothe June while simultaneously feeling utterly helpless. The door opened, and Santos entered carrying a bundle of cloth. His weathered face creased into a sympathetic smile. "The little one. She is hungry and wet, see? I have brought what I could find. Old sheets we can use for diapers, and there is goat's milk warming by the fire. Not as good as Mama's milk, but it will do until we reach your sister." Clara felt tears prick her eyes at his kindness. "Thank you, Santos. I don't know what we would have done without you and Mr. Hale." "We do what neighbors do," Santos said simply, setting the bundle on the bed. "Come. Bring her to the kitchen when she is changed. Rowan has gone to check the horses, but he will return soon." After Santos left, Clara changed June as best she could, tearing one of the sheets into rough squares and fashioning a makeshift diaper. June's cries quieted to whimpers as Clara carried her to the kitchen, where a bottle of warm goat's milk waited on the table. June took to the bottle eagerly, her tiny hands gripping it as she drank. Clara held her close, watching the morning light paint the kitchen walls gold, and allowed herself a moment of peace. That peace shattered when the door burst open and Rowan strode in, his face grim. "We have a problem," he said without preamble. "There are riders coming, 3 of them, maybe a mile out." Santos appeared from the back room, his expression alert. "Who?" "Can't tell yet, but they're coming from the north, from Silver Ridge direction." Rowan's eyes found Clara's. "You expecting anyone to come looking for you?" Clara shook her head, her heart beginning to pound. "Thomas doesn't know we're here. He'd have no reason to—" "Then these aren't friends," Rowan said flatly. He crossed to a cabinet and pulled out a rifle, checking it with practiced efficiency. "Santos, take Mrs. Winslow and the baby to the back room. Keep them quiet and out of sight until I know what we're dealing with." "Rowan," Santos began. "Now," Rowan said, his voice brooking no argument. Santos moved quickly, ushering Clara and June down the hallway to the small bedroom they'd slept in. He positioned them in the corner farthest from the window and pressed a finger to his lips. Through the walls, Clara could hear the sound of approaching hoofbeats, then voices. "Morning," Rowan's voice carried clearly, calm and measured. "Something I can help you gentlemen with?" A different voice answered, smooth and cultured, with an edge that made Clara's skin crawl. "Rowan Hale. Been a while since we've crossed paths." "Not long enough, Kincaid." Clara's breath caught. She didn't know the name, but the way Rowan said it with barely controlled contempt told her everything she needed to know. Now, the smooth voice continued. That's no way to greet neighbors. My son Garrett here was just saying we should ride over, see how you weathered yesterday's flood. Terrible business, flash floods. Never know what they might wash up. There was a pause, heavy with unspoken meaning. Ranch is fine, Rowan said. Appreciate the concern, but as you can see, everything's standing. So, if that's all… Actually, we're looking for someone, a younger voice interrupted. Garrett, Clara assumed. A woman and a baby. They were traveling the creek road yesterday when the flood hit. Their driver drowned, poor bastard. We figured if anyone survived, they might have washed up near your place. Clara's arms tightened around June. How did they know? How could they possibly know about her and June unless someone had told them, or unless they'd been watching the road? Haven't seen anyone, Rowan said, and Clara marveled at how easily the lie came to him. Like I said, flood didn't touch the ranch. If someone had washed up, I'd have found them yesterday when I was checking my fences. The smooth voice, Kincaid, sounded unconvinced. Mind if we take a look around, just to ease our minds? The woman's sister is worried sick, you understand. Margaret Duncan. Lives up near Silver Ridge. Maggie. They were talking about Maggie. Which meant they knew exactly who Clara was and where she'd been headed. I do mind, actually, Rowan said, and Clara heard steel in his voice. This is my property, Kincaid. You want to search it. You bring a marshal with a warrant. Otherwise, you can turn those horses around and ride back the way you came. That's real unfriendly, Hale. I'm not feeling friendly. Your boy there tried to run off 30 of my cattle last month. Only reason I didn't shoot him is because I can't prove it was him. But I know your brand and I know your methods. So no, you're not welcome on my land. The tension stretched so tight Clara could feel it through the walls. June squirmed in her arms, and Clara pressed her hand gently over the baby's mouth, praying she wouldn't cry. Then Kincaid laughed, a cold sound devoid of humor. You always were stubborn, Hale. Fine. We'll leave. But if you do happen to see a woman and a baby, Clara Winslow is her name, you'll let us know, won't you? Her sister's awful worried, and you know how dangerous it is for a woman alone in this territory, all kinds of trouble she could run into. I'll keep that in mind, Rowan said flatly. You do that. The sound of horses moving, then Kincaid's voice again, farther away now. Oh, and Hale? That northern pasture of yours, the one bordering Duncan land? Might want to keep a closer eye on it. Heard there's been some rustling trouble up that way. Would be a shame if you lost any more cattle. The hoofbeats faded into the distance. Clara waited, barely breathing, until Santos appeared in the doorway. They're gone, he said quietly. But Rowan, he wants to speak with you. Clara followed Santos back to the kitchen, where Rowan stood at the window, watching the riders disappear into the distance. When he turned to face her, his expression was grave. You want to tell me why Dawson Kincaid is looking for you? He asked. Clara sank into a chair, holding June close. I don't know, she said honestly. I've never heard that name before. I don't know who he is or why he'd be looking for me. He's trouble, Rowan said bluntly. Dawson Kincaid owns the biggest spread in the territory, the Double K Ranch. Been buying up land for years, pushing out the small homesteaders. Anyone who won't sell, he makes their life hell until they leave anyway. He paused, his jaw tight. You said your sister has a homestead near Silver Ridge. Yes, Margaret and Thomas Duncan. They've been there 2 years, maybe 3. What's on their land? Rowan asked. Water? Mineral deposits? Prime grazing? Clara tried to remember what Maggie had written in her letters. There's a spring. Maggie mentioned it several times, said it was one of the reasons Thomas chose that spot. The water runs year-round, even in drought. Rowan and Santos exchanged a look. That's it then, Santos said heavily. The spring. Kincaid has been trying to control the water rights in this valley for years. A year-round spring on Duncan land, that would be worth a fortune to him. But they can't just take it, Clara protested. It's Maggie's land. They have a deed, legal and proper. Legal doesn't mean much out here when you're up against men like Kincaid, Rowan said. He uses intimidation, threats, violence when he needs to. Burns barns, runs off livestock, makes it impossible for families to stay. His eyes met Clara's. And if he knows you're here, if he knows you're traveling to your sister's place, he'll use you as leverage. Clara felt cold all over. Use me how? To pressure your sister into selling, or to draw her and her husband out where he can get at them. Rowan moved away from the window, his expression thoughtful. That's why he mentioned her by name. He wanted me to know he knows who you are, where you're going. It's a message. What kind of message? That he's watching, that he knows your business, that if you show up at your sister's place, he'll make sure everyone involved pays the price. Rowan rubbed his jaw, thinking. Question is, how did he know you were coming? Your sister tell anyone? Clara shook her head. I don't think so. Maggie's letter said to come quickly but quietly. She seemed worried even then. A horrible thought occurred to her. Do you think she's already in trouble? That Kincaid has already threatened them? Probably, Santos said gently. If the spring is as valuable as you say, he would have been pressuring them for months, maybe years. Clara looked down at June, who had fallen back asleep in her arms, blissfully unaware of the danger surrounding them. She'd thought the flood was the worst thing that could happen. She'd been wrong. What do I do? She whispered. Rowan was quiet for a long moment, his gray eyes distant. Finally, he said, You stay here. At least for a few days, until I can ride to Silver Ridge and talk to your sister. Find out what the situation is, what kind of pressure Kincaid's been applying, then we'll figure out the safest way to get you there. I can't ask you to do that, Clara said immediately. You've already done so much. You're not asking, I'm offering. Rowan's voice was firm. Kincaid and I have history. He tried to push me off my land 5 years ago, right after... He stopped, swallowed. Right after I lost my family. Thought I'd be easy pickings. He was wrong. I've been a thorn in his side ever since, and he knows if he pushes me too hard, I'll push back harder. Your sister doesn't have that kind of protection. You would do this for strangers? Clara asked. Rowan looked at June, and his expression softened. You're not strangers anymore, he said quietly. Soon as I pulled you out of that water, you became my responsibility. I don't walk away from my responsibilities. Santos nodded approvingly. This is good. I will go with you to Silver Ridge. 2 riders are better than 1, and the Duncans, they should know they have friends. No, Rowan said. You stay here with Mrs. Winslow and June. If Kincaid sends someone back while I'm gone, I want you here. Santos opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again, nodding reluctantly. See, you are right. But you be careful, Rowan. Kincaid, he is not above ambush. I know, Rowan turned to Clara. I'll leave at first light tomorrow. Should be back by nightfall, maybe sooner if the ride goes smooth. Santos will take care of you in June. You need anything, you ask him. And if anyone else comes around... We hide, Clara finished. I understand. Good. Rowan grabbed his hat from the peg by the door. I'm going to check the northern fence line. Make sure Kincaid's threat about rustlers wasn't just talk. Santos, keep the rifle close. He left without another word, and Clara watched through the window as he saddled Thunder and rode out. There was something about the way he sat a horse, easy and natural but alert, always watching, that spoke of a man who'd learned to be cautious the hard way. He is a good man, Santos said, following her gaze. Stubborn, too proud, sometimes too quick to take on other people's troubles. But good, through and through. He said he lost his family, Clara said quietly. 5 years ago. Santos's weathered face grew sad. See, Maria and their son, Christopher. The boy, he was only 3 years old. Fever swept through the valley that winter, killed a dozen people. Rowan, he tried everything. Rode through a blizzard to fetch the doctor, stayed up for days nursing them. But the fever, it was too strong. He shook his head. When they died, something in Rowan died too. He stopped going to town, stopped talking to neighbors, just worked his ranch and kept to himself. Until yesterday, when he dove into that flood without thinking. That is the old Rowan, the man who cannot stand by when someone needs help. Clara's eyes burned. She'd been so wrapped up in her own grief over Daniel that she hadn't considered that everyone carried their own sorrows. How did he bear it, losing them both? He did not. Not really. He just kept moving, kept working. That is what we do, see? When the grief is too big to face, we put one foot in front of the other and we survive. Santos smiled slightly. But today, when he held your little June, I saw something in his eyes. Something I have not seen in 5 years. Hope, maybe. Or purpose. Something worth protecting. Before Clara could respond, June woke with a cry. The rest of the day passed in a blur of feeding, changing, and trying to keep the baby entertained with no toys or familiar things to comfort her. Santos proved surprisingly adept with children, making faces that made June giggle and carving a small wooden rattle from a piece of pine. For my grandchildren, he explained when Clara thanked him. I have 7, all back in Sonora. I have not seen them in 3 years, but I remember how to make the little ones smile. Why haven't you gone back to see them? Clara asked. Santos's smile turned sad. Because Rowan, he needs me. When Maria and Christopher died, everyone else left or stayed away. They did not know what to say, so they said nothing. I stayed because someone had to, and now, after 5 years, this is my home. But someday, when Rowan is ready to live again instead of just survive, maybe then I will go visit my family. That evening, Rowan returned just before sunset, his expression dark. Northern fence is cut in 3 places, he reported. 20 head gone, maybe more. Fresh tracks leading toward Double K land. Santos swore in Spanish. He wastes no time. Never does. Rowan pulled off his hat and ran a hand through his hair. This is about pressure. He's showing me what happens to people who don't cooperate, which means he's serious about getting to your sister through you, Mrs. Winslow. Clara, she said quietly, please. After everything, I think you can call me Clara. Rowan's eyes met hers, and something passed between them. An understanding, an acknowledgement of the bond that had formed when he'd pulled her from the flood. Clara, then, he said, and you should call me Rowan. That night, after June had been put to bed and Santos had retired to his small room off the kitchen, Clara found Rowan sitting on the porch, cleaning his rifle. She stepped outside, wrapping the borrowed shawl around her shoulders against the cool desert night. Can't sleep? Rowan asked without looking up. Too much thinking, Clara admitted. She sat on the bench beside him, careful to keep a respectful distance. I keep wondering what I should do, whether I should just leave, try to make it to Maggie's on my own. I don't want to bring more trouble to your door. You'd never make it, Rowan said bluntly. 25 miles through open country with a baby and no supplies? Kincaid's men would spot you in an hour, and then… He shook his head. No, you stay here until I know what we're dealing with. But your cattle can be replaced. You and June can't. He set down the rifle and finally looked at her. I know what you're thinking, that you're a burden, that you're causing problems. But Clara, the problems were already here. Kincaid's been pushing at me for years. This is just the latest move in a long game. Clara studied his profile in the moonlight, the strong jaw, the scar through his eyebrow, the lines around his eyes that spoke of years of squinting into the sun. Santos said you used to be different, before the fever. Rowan was quiet for so long Clara thought he wouldn't answer. When he did, his voice was rough. I was. I smiled more, talked more, believed the world was mostly good and people were mostly decent. He laughed without humor. Maria used to say I was too trusting, that I saw the best in everyone. She was the cautious one, the one who watched for danger. After she died, I realized she'd been right all along. The world isn't kind. People will take everything you love if you're not careful. But you still helped us, Clara said softly. Even though you could have ridden past that wagon, even though helping us is bringing you nothing but trouble. I couldn't ride past, Rowan said. I tried to be that man, the one who keeps his head down and his heart closed. For 5 years I tried, but when I saw you in that water holding June, knowing you were about to die, he stopped, his jaw working. I couldn't let it happen. I couldn't stand by and watch another child die. Not if there was any chance I could stop it. Clara's throat tightened. Thank you, she whispered, for not riding past. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the night sounds. Coyotes in the distance, the rustle of wind through the sage, the soft sounds of horses in the corral. It was Clara who finally spoke again. My husband died 6 months ago, she said. Daniel. He was a good man, kind and gentle. He worked as a bookkeeper in Tucson. Nothing glamorous, but steady work, decent pay. Then one day he didn't come home. They found him in an alley, beaten to death for the $3 in his pocket. She felt the familiar grief rise in her chest, but it was duller now, worn smooth by time. I was 5 months pregnant. I had no family in Tucson, no real friends, just me and a baby on the way, and no idea how I was going to survive. But you did, Rowan said. Barely. I sold everything we owned, took work where I could find it. When June was born, Maggie wrote and said to come north that she and Thomas had room for us. It seemed like a new start, a chance to build something. She laughed bitterly. I didn't expect to nearly die before I even got there. You're stronger than you think, Rowan said. Most people would have given up in that wagon. Let the water take them. But you fought. You held on to June, and you fought. I had to. She's all I have left. I know the feeling, Rowan said quietly. Then, as if realizing he'd revealed too much, he stood. It's late. You should get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. Clara stood too, but before she went inside, she touched his arm. Rowan? For what it's worth, I think Maria was wrong. The world does have good people in it. You proved that. She didn't wait for his response, just slipped inside and closed the door quietly behind her. But through the window, she saw him standing on the porch for a long time, staring out at the darkness, and she wondered what he was thinking. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Rowan was up before sunrise, preparing Thunder for the long ride to Silver Ridge. Santos packed supplies, food, water, ammunition, while Clara fed June and tried not to let her worry show. I should be back by nightfall, Rowan said as he checked his saddle. But if I'm not, don't worry. Might just mean I decided to stay the night at Duncan's place, assess the situation more thoroughly. And if Kincaid's men come back, Clara asked, you hide, just like yesterday. Santos knows what to do. Rowan swung into the saddle, then looked down at her. You'll be safe here, Clara. I promise. It's not me I'm worried about, Clara said. It's you. If Kincaid really is as dangerous as you say, I can handle Kincaid. Rowan's expression was grim. I've been doing it for 5 years. He rode out without another word, and Clara watched until he disappeared over the horizon. Then she turned to find Santos watching her with knowing eyes. You worry for him, the old man observed. I worry for all of us, Clara said. But it wasn't entirely true. There was something about Rowan Hale, something in those steady gray eyes, in the way he'd held June so gently, in the way he'd thrown himself into danger without hesitation, that made her worry for him specifically, made her want him to come back safe. It was a dangerous feeling, she knew. She'd barely been widowed 6 months. Her heart should still be too bruised, too broken, to feel anything for another man. But grief was strange. Sometimes it made you numb. Sometimes it made you hyper-aware of mortality, desperate to hold on to anything living and strong and real. She pushed the thoughts away and focused on June, on getting through the day, on not imagining all the ways Rowan might not come back. The hours crawled past. Santos taught her how to make tortillas, showed her where the chickens laid their eggs, told her stories about growing up in Sonora. June seemed content, happy even, gurgling at Santos's exaggerated expressions and grabbing at the wooden rattle he'd made. But Clara couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Several times she caught herself going to the window, scanning the horizon for riders. Once she thought she saw dust in the distance, but it dissipated before forming into anything definite. You have good instincts, Santos said when he caught her looking. In this country, paranoia keeps you alive. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, Clara's worry intensified. Rowan had said he'd be back by nightfall. The light was fading, and there was still no sign of him. Should we be concerned? She asked Santos as they stood on the porch, watching the last rays of sun paint the sky orange and purple. Not yet, Santos said, but his hand rested on the rifle leaning against the porch rail. Give him another hour. The Duncans, maybe this convinced him to stay, to wait until morning to ride back. It's safer that way. But they both knew that if Rowan had decided to stay, he would have sent word somehow, would have at least tried to let them know not to worry. Full darkness fell, and still no Rowan. Santos lit the lamps, checked the rifle, barred the door. "We wait," he said firmly. "If he is not back by morning, I will go look for him. But tonight, we stay alert." Clara barely slept. Every sound made her start. The wind rattling the shutters, a coyote's howl, the horses shifting in the corral. She held June close, trying to draw comfort from her daughter's warmth, and prayed to a God she wasn't sure was listening that Rowan Hale would ride back over that horizon come morning. Just before dawn, she finally dozed off, exhausted. She woke to Santos shaking her shoulder. "Clara," he said urgently, "someone is coming." She bolted upright, her heart pounding. "Is it—" "I do not know." "One rider, coming fast." "Get June and go to the back room, now." Clara scooped up her daughter and ran. Through the walls she heard the thunder of hoofbeats, heard them slow and stop outside the house. Heard Santos call out, "Who comes?" Then, like a prayer answered, Rowan's voice. "It's me, Santos. Open up." Clara nearly collapsed with relief. She heard the door open, heard Santos exclaim in Spanish, heard Rowan's weary voice responding. When she emerged from the back room, she found Rowan in the kitchen, his face haggard, dried blood on his sleeve. "What happened?" Santos demanded, already reaching for bandages. "Ambush," Rowan said shortly. "They were waiting on the road about 5 miles from Duncan's place. 4 of them, maybe 5. I managed to get past, but not before one of them got a shot off. Grazed my arm. Nothing serious." "Who?" Clara asked, though she already knew. "Kincaid's men." Rowan's jaw was tight. "They weren't trying to kill me, just slow me down, warn me off. But I made it to your sister's place, Clara, and I talked to Thomas Duncan. He confirmed what we suspected. Kincaid's been pressuring them hard for months, trying to buy their land, threatening them when they refuse. Last week he told them he knew you were coming, that if they didn't sell, he'd make sure you never made it to their homestead alive." Clara felt ice in her veins. "He threatened June?" "He threatened all of you. Said accidents happen all the time in this territory. Floods, fires, raids. Said it would be a shame if something happened to their sister and her baby." Rowan's eyes were hard. "Thomas wanted to come back with me, bring you and June there anyway, but I convinced him that's exactly what Kincaid wants. He wants you together in one place where he can apply maximum pressure." "So what do we do?" Clara whispered. Rowan looked at her, and despite his exhaustion, his gaze was steady. "We fight, but we do it smart, and we do it together. Your sister's not alone anymore. She's got Thomas, she's got you, and now she's got me and Santos. Kincaid wants a war, we'll give him one. But on our terms, not his." Santos grinned fiercely. "Now you sound like the old Rowan, the one who would not back down from a fight." "I've backed down from too many fights," Rowan said quietly. "Time to stop running." He looked at June, asleep in Clara's arms, and something shifted in his expression, something protective and determined. Time to stand and fight. Clara spent the next 3 days learning what it meant to live under the shadow of a threat. Santos taught her how to load the spare rifle, how to bar the doors properly, how to keep watch without being seen from a distance. Rowan rode out each morning to check his fences and look for signs of Kincaid's men, always returning before nightfall with a grim expression that told Clara the pressure was building. On the 4th morning, a rider appeared on the horizon carrying a white flag. Santos spotted him first and called Rowan in from the corral. They watched together as the rider approached slowly, one hand raised to show he meant no harm. "That's one of Duncan's hands," Rowan said, his hand relaxing on his rifle. "Name's Cooper. Good man." The rider pulled up 20 yards from the house, his young face tight with worry. "Mr. Hale, Mrs. Winslow, if you're in there, you need to hear this." Clara stepped onto the porch, June in her arms. "I'm here. What's happened?" Cooper's eyes widened slightly at the sight of her, then his expression grew urgent. "It's your sister, ma'am. There was a fire last night. Someone torched the workshop where Mr. Duncan does his carpentry. He managed to put it out before it spread to the house, but—" He swallowed hard. "Mrs. Duncan, she's asking for you. Says she needs to see you're safe, needs to know you and the baby are all right. She's beside herself with worry." Clara's heart clenched. "Is Maggie hurt? Is she—" "She's fine physically, but she's scared, ma'am. Real scared. Mr. Duncan too, though he won't show it. They want you to come home, say they can protect you better if you're all together." "That's exactly what Kincaid wants," Rowan said flatly. "Get them all in one place, make them desperate enough to sell." "I know that, sir," Cooper said. "Mr. Duncan knows it too. But Mrs. Duncan, she says she won't sell, won't give in, but she needs to see her sister. Needs to know Mrs. Winslow is alive." He looked at Clara, his young face earnest. "She's been crying for 3 days straight, ma'am, ever since Mr. Hale came and told them about the flood. She thinks you're dead, thinks she's going to find your body washed up somewhere downstream." Clara felt torn in two. Every instinct screamed at her to go to Maggie, to comfort her sister, to let her see that June was safe. But Rowan was right. Going to the Duncan homestead now would be walking straight into Kincaid's trap. "Tell my sister I'm safe," Clara said, her voice shaking. "Tell her June is healthy and happy, and we're being protected by good people. Tell her," her voice broke, "tell her I love her, and I'll come as soon as it's safe." Cooper nodded slowly. "I'll tell her, ma'am, but—" He hesitated, then said in a rush, "There's something else you should know. Kincaid rode up yesterday afternoon with his son and about 10 men, told Mr. Duncan he was done waiting, that he wanted an answer about the land by the end of the week. When Mr. Duncan refused, Kincaid looked right at Mrs. Duncan and said it would be a shame if the house burned next, with her inside it." Rowan's face went hard as stone. "He threatened Maggie directly?" "Yes, sir. And then he said something about how families should stick together, how Mrs. Winslow and her baby ought to be with her sister so they could all make the right decision together." Cooper's jaw tightened. "It wasn't subtle, sir. He's trying to force them to bring Mrs. Winslow in, use her and the baby as leverage." Santos swore in Spanish. Rowan stood silent for a long moment, his gray eyes distant, thinking. Finally he said, "Cooper, you ride back to Duncan and tell him this. We're coming, but not the way Kincaid expects. Tell him to gather every ally he has, every small rancher and homesteader who's been pushed around by the Double K. Tell them to meet at his place 3 days from now, at noon. We're going to have a town meeting, official and legal. And we're going to air every grievance against Kincaid where everyone can hear it." Cooper's eyes widened. "Sir, that's declaring war." "No," Rowan said quietly. "It's demanding justice. There's a difference. Kincaid's been getting away with intimidation and violence because people are too scared to stand together. Time to change that." "He'll never let it happen peaceful," Cooper warned. "He'll bring his men, shut it down. Let him try. We'll have witnesses, we'll have numbers, and we'll have right on our side." Rowan's voice was firm. "Tell Duncan to send word to the territorial marshal too. Let's make this official." After Cooper rode off, Santos turned to Rowan with a worried expression. "You know this is dangerous. Kincaid, he will not just stand by and let you organize the homesteaders against him." "I know," Rowan said, "which is why we need to be smart about it. Clara, you and June will come with us to Duncan's place, but you'll stay in the house, out of sight. Santos and I will handle the meeting. If things go bad, you get Maggie and June, and you hide. Understood?" Clara wanted to argue, wanted to say she wouldn't cower while others fought her battles. But when she looked at June, sleeping peacefully in her arms, she knew Rowan was right. Her first duty was to keep her daughter safe. "Understood," she said quietly. The next 2 days passed in tense preparation. Rowan rode to 3 neighboring ranches, talking to men Clara never saw, building alliances. Santos checked and rechecked their weapons, made sure they had enough ammunition, enough supplies. Clara packed what little they had and tried not to think about all the ways this could go wrong. On the morning of the 3rd day, they set out for the Duncan homestead. Rowan rode Thunder with Clara and June seated in front of him, while Santos followed on his sturdy paint mare. The journey that should have taken 6 hours stretched to 8 as Rowan deliberately took a winding route, watching constantly for ambushes. They saw no one, but Clara felt eyes on them the entire ride. Several times Rowan pulled Thunder to a halt, studying the landscape before nodding to himself and continuing. Each time, Clara's heart hammered against her ribs, and she held June tighter. It was late afternoon when they finally crested a hill, and Clara saw her sister's homestead for the first time. It sat in a small valley, protected on 3 sides by low ridges, with a year-round stream running through the property. The house was small but well-built, adobe and timber, with a porch that wrapped around 2 sides. Beyond it stood a barn, chicken coops, and the blackened remains of what must have been the workshop. Before they could ride down, a figure emerged from behind a rock outcropping, rifle raised. Then the gun lowered, and a man's voice called out, "Rowan Hale! About time you showed up!" "Thomas Duncan," Rowan called back. "You planning to shoot me or let me pass? Depends on whether you brought my sister-in-law safe like you promised." Thomas stepped into view, a tall man with broad shoulders and a weathered face. His eyes found Clara, and his expression softened. "Mrs. Winslow, Maggie's been out of her mind with worry." "I'm sorry," Clara said. "I never meant to cause trouble." "Trouble found you, not the other way around." Thomas moved to Thunder's side and reached up to help Clara down. "Come on, let's get you inside before anyone spots us out here in the open." They hurried to the house, where the door flew open before they reached it. Maggie stood in the doorway, her face tear-stained, her hands pressed to her mouth. When she saw Clara, a sob escaped her. "Clara! Oh God, Clara!" The sisters fell into each other's arms, both crying, both trying to talk at once. June, caught between them, let out an indignant wail that made them both laugh through their tears. "Let me see her," Maggie said, pulling back to look at June. "Oh, she's gotten so big. And she's beautiful, Clara, just beautiful." "She looks like Daniel," Clara said softly. "She looks like you too. Look at that chin. Pure Winslow stubbornness." Maggie wiped her eyes and finally seemed to notice the men standing awkwardly in the doorway. "Mr. Hale, Santos, thank you for keeping them safe. I don't know how to repay you." "No repayment needed," Rowan said. "But we need to talk, all of us, about Kincaid and what's coming." They gathered around the kitchen table while Maggie made coffee. The house was neat and homey, with curtains at the windows and a rag rug on the floor, but Clara could see the signs of stress, the dark circles under her sister's eyes, the way Thomas kept his rifle within arm's reach, the bars that had been installed on the inside of the door and windows. "Cooper said you're planning a town meeting," Thomas said, cradling his coffee cup. "I've sent word to everyone I could think of, the Morrisons, the Chens, the Hoffmans, old Bill Weatherby from up north. Most of them have agreed to come, but they're scared, Rowan. Scared of what Kincaid will do if they stand against him." "They should be scared," Rowan said bluntly. "Kincaid doesn't forgive and he doesn't forget. But they should be more scared of what happens if they don't stand together. One by one, he'll take everyone's land. Together, we have a chance." "Did you contact the territorial marshal?" Santos asked. Thomas nodded. "Sent a rider to Tucson 4 days ago. Marshal Briggs sent word back that he'll be here tomorrow morning. Said he's heard rumors about Kincaid's methods and he wants to investigate." "Good," Rowan said. "That's good. Having the law here will make Kincaid think twice about getting violent." "Or it'll make him desperate," Thomas countered. "A cornered animal is the most dangerous kind." They talked for another hour, planning positions, discussing what to do if Kincaid's men tried to disrupt the meeting, making contingencies for every scenario they could imagine. Through it all, Clara watched Rowan, seeing a side of him she hadn't witnessed before. He was strategic, thoughtful, considering angles and possibilities with the mind of a man who'd fought before and learned from it. When the planning was done, Maggie showed Clara to the small bedroom that had been prepared for her in June. It was simple but welcoming, with a bed covered in a wedding ring quilt and a cradle that Thomas had built from pine. "I made it when you first wrote saying you were pregnant," Maggie said, running her hand over the smooth wood. "Finished it the week Daniel died. I kept hoping you'd come, that I'd get to see you use it." Clara set June in the cradle and watched her daughter's eyes grow heavy. "I should have come sooner, should have left Tucson right after Daniel was buried." "You were grieving. You needed time." Maggie sat on the edge of the bed, patting the space beside her. When Clara sat, Maggie took her hand. "Tell me true, Clara. Are you all right? Really all right? Cooper said you nearly drowned, that Rowan Hale pulled you from the flood at the last second." Clara thought about how to answer. Was she all right? She'd lost her husband, nearly lost her daughter, and was now caught in the middle of a range war. But she was alive. June was alive. And for the first time since Daniel's death, she felt something other than numb despair. "I'm surviving," she said finally. "Some days that's all I can manage. But Rowan and Santos, they've been good to us, Maggie, better than they had any reason to be. Rowan saved our lives, and he's risking everything to help us now. I don't know why, but I'm grateful." Maggie studied her face. "He's a good man. Thomas has known him for years, says he used to be even better before his family died. But Clara," she hesitated, "be careful. I see the way you look at him, and I see the way he looks at June, like she matters, like you both matter. And that's dangerous when you're both still grieving." "I know," Clara whispered, "but Maggie, when he held me in that water, when he told me to look at him and breathe, I felt safe for the first time in months. Not happy, not healed, but safe. That has to count for something." "It does," Maggie said softly. "Just don't forget, safe and in love are two different things. Don't confuse one for the other." That night, Clara lay in the darkness, listening to June's soft breathing and thinking about Maggie's warning. Was she confusing safety with something deeper? Did it matter when tomorrow might bring violence and chaos? She didn't know. All she knew was that when Rowan had looked at her before going to bed down in the barn with Santos and Thomas, his gray eyes had held something she recognized. Not love, not yet, but the possibility of it. The first green shoots of something that might grow, given time and care and the right conditions. If they survived tomorrow, maybe she'd let herself explore that possibility. If they survived. The next morning dawned hot and clear. By 10 o'clock, wagons and riders had begun arriving at the Duncan homestead. Clara watched from the window as families gathered, weathered men and sun-hardened women, children playing in the dust, everyone looking nervous but determined. Thomas and Rowan had set up a makeshift platform near the barn, just 2 planks across sawhorses, but it served. The territorial marshal arrived at 11, a steel-haired man with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense bearing. He introduced himself as Marshal Briggs, shook hands with Rowan and Thomas, and surveyed the growing crowd with approval. "Good turnout," he said. "That'll make it harder for Kincaid to claim this is just a few troublemakers." "He'll still try," Rowan said. "He always does." At noon exactly, Kincaid arrived. He rode in with his son Garrett and 15 armed men, their horses kicking up clouds of dust. They didn't dismount, just arranged themselves in a loose semicircle at the edge of the gathering, a clear show of force. Dawson Kincaid was in his 50s, Clara guessed, watching from the window. He had the bearing of a man used to getting his way, straight-backed in the saddle, expensive clothes, a face that might have been handsome if not for the cruelty in his eyes. His son Garrett was younger, maybe 30, with his father's arrogance but none of his self-control. Thomas stepped onto the platform, and the crowd quieted. "Thank you all for coming," he said, his voice carrying across the yard. "I know it wasn't easy, leaving your ranches, taking the risk, but we're here because we have to be. Because what's been happening in this valley isn't right, and it's time someone said so out loud." "And who exactly are you to decide what's right?" Kincaid called out. "You're a nothing, Duncan, a 2-bit homesteader squatting on land that should be part of a real ranch." "I have a legal deed," Thomas said evenly. "Bought and paid for, filed with the territory, same as most folks here. That makes me a landowner, not a squatter." "Legal today, maybe, but the law changes. Land changes hands. Smart people know when to sell and move on." "And people who refuse to sell?" Marshal Briggs spoke up, moving to stand beside the platform. "What happens to them, Mr. Kincaid?" Kincaid's eyes narrowed when he saw the marshal's badge. "Marshal Briggs, didn't expect to see you all the way out here." "I go where I'm needed, and I've been hearing some troubling reports about this area. Cattle rustling, mysterious fires, threats made against families. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you?" "I know this valley has gotten dangerous," Kincaid said smoothly. "Raiders, rustlers, all sorts of trouble. That's why small homesteaders like Duncan need the protection of a bigger outfit. My outfit. I've been trying to buy them out for their own safety, but some people are too stubborn to see reason." "Funny how that trouble only seems to affect people who won't sell to you," Rowan said, stepping up beside Thomas. He'd been standing at the edge of the crowd, but now he moved forward, and Clara saw every eye turn to him. "Morrison lost 50 head last month, all of them found on Double K land. The Chens had their barn burned down the day after they refused your offer, and Tom Duncan here had his workshop torched 3 nights ago. That's not random trouble, Kincaid. That's a pattern." "That's an accusation," Garrett Kincaid snarled, his hand moving toward his gun. "You calling my father a criminal, Hale?" "I'm saying the evidence speaks for itself," Rowan said calmly. And I'm saying I'm not the only one here who's had problems with your father's methods. Anyone else want to speak up? For a moment, no one moved. Then an old man stepped forward, Bill Weatherby, Claire remembered from Thomas's list. His weathered face was grim. My fence line was cut last spring, he said in a voice that shook slightly. Lost 20 head that wandered onto Double K land. When I asked for them back, Kincaid's men said I'd have to prove they were mine. But they were wearing my brand clear as day. Never got them back. My well was poisoned, a Chinese man spoke up. Clara recognized Chen from Thomas's descriptions. Someone threw a dead calf into it. Had to dig a new one. Cost me 6 months' savings. Week later, Kincaid rode up, offered to buy my land before anything else unfortunate happened. More voices joined in, one after another, each telling a story of harassment, theft, intimidation. The crowd's energy shifted, anger replacing fear as people realized they weren't alone. Kincaid's face grew darker with each testimony. These are lies, he said flatly. Speculation and lies from people looking to blame their own failures on someone successful. Then you won't mind answering some questions under oath, Marshal Briggs said. I'll be conducting a formal investigation starting tomorrow. Anyone with evidence of criminal activity, I want to hear it. You have no authority to... I have every authority. I'm a territorial marshal, and these are serious allegations. You'll cooperate, Mr. Kincaid, or I'll start asking why you're so reluctant to clear your name. For a moment, Clara thought Kincaid might refuse. His jaw worked, his hand clenching on his reins. But then he smiled, cold and calculating. Of course, Marshal. I'm happy to cooperate. I've got nothing to hide. His eyes swept the crowd, lingering on Thomas, on Rowan, on the families gathered. But I hope everyone here understands, this valley isn't big enough for all of us. The weak will be pushed out eventually. That's just nature. Nature, hell, old Bill Weatherby spat. That's greed. Kincaid's smile never wavered, but his eyes were like ice. Call it what you want. But mark my words, people who stand against me tend to regret it. Accidents happen. Floods, fires, mysterious illnesses. This is hard country, and hard countries don't forgive mistakes. The threat hung in the air, barely veiled. Marshal Briggs stepped forward, his hand on his sidearm. That sounded an awful lot like a threat, Mr. Kincaid. You want to rephrase that, or should I add intimidation to the list of charges I'm investigating? No threat, Marshal, just stating facts. Kincaid wheeled his horse. Come on, boys. We've heard enough. These people want to play at being ranchers. Let them. Winter's coming. We'll see how many are left come spring. He rode off with his men following, but Garrett lingered a moment longer. His eyes found the house, found the window where Clara stood, and his smile made her blood run cold. Then he turned and followed his father. Clara stepped back from the window, her heart pounding. Maggie appeared beside her, her face pale. He saw you, Maggie whispered. He knows you're here. Let him know, Clara said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. We're not hiding anymore. But as she watched the Kincaid men disappear over the ridge, she couldn't shake the feeling that they'd just made everything worse. The meeting had been a show of unity, yes, but it had also been a declaration of war. And Kincaid didn't look like a man who lost wars gracefully. Outside, the crowd was dispersing, families climbing into wagons and mounting horses. Thomas and Rowan stood with Marshal Briggs, talking intently. Santos had positioned himself by the barn, rifle in hand, watching the ridges. June started crying, and Clara picked her up, bouncing her gently. Through the window, she saw Rowan glance toward the house, his expression concerned. Their eyes met across the distance, and something passed between them. An acknowledgement of the danger they were all in, a shared determination to see this through. The marshal left shortly after, promising to return the next day to begin taking formal statements. The neighboring families followed until only the Morrisons remained, talking quietly with Thomas about establishing a night watch system. Clara was nursing June when she heard the commotion outside. Voices raised, someone shouting. She rushed to the window and saw Santos pointing toward the north ridge, where a column of smoke was rising into the clear sky. Morrison's place, Thomas said grimly, shading his eyes. That's got to be at least 5 miles from here. We can see it because it's a big fire. Morrison turned white. My house. My family. I left my wife and kids there with just 2 hands to watch over them. Go, Rowan said immediately. Take Weatherby and Chen with you. We'll follow as soon as we can. Morrison was already running for his horse. The other men scrambled to mount up, and within minutes they were thundering away across the valley. Thomas started for his own horse, but Rowan caught his arm. Wait, think about this. Kincaid leaves here, and 20 minutes later Morrison's place is burning? That's too convenient. You think it's a trap, Thomas said slowly. I think it's a distraction. Rowan's eyes scanned the ridges surrounding the homestead. He wants us to leave this place undefended, wants to draw us away so his men can do what they really came here for. Which is... Rowan looked at the house, where Clara stood in the window with June. To take Clara and the baby, to give him the leverage he needs to force your hand. As if summoned by his words, riders appeared on 3 sides of the homestead. Not 15 this time, at least 30, maybe more, converging from different directions. They'd been waiting in concealment, Clara realized with horror, waiting for the other families to leave, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Into the house, Thomas shouted. Everyone inside, now! Santos was already moving, running for the porch. Rowan followed, turning to fire a warning shot over the approaching riders' heads. The shot echoed across the valley, but the riders kept coming. Clara grabbed June and ran from the window just as the first bullet shattered the glass. Maggie screamed, pulling her away from the flying shards. Thomas burst through the door, Santos and Rowan right behind him, and they immediately began barring the windows and doors. How many? Thomas asked, checking his rifle. 30, maybe more, Rowan said grimly. They've got us surrounded. Another shot, then another, the sound of bullets thudding into adobe walls, pinging off the tin roof. Clara clutched June to her chest and crouched in the corner farthest from the windows, her whole body shaking. This was it. This was what Maggie had warned her about. Kincaid hadn't been bluffing. He'd just been waiting for the right moment. And now they were trapped, outnumbered, with no help coming. Rowan appeared beside her, his face streaked with dust and sweat. Clara, listen to me. There's a root cellar under the kitchen. Maggie knows where. You take June and you hide there, understand? Don't come out no matter what you hear. What about you? What about... We'll hold them off. His gray eyes were steady, certain. But if something happens, if they get inside, you stay hidden. You protect June. Promise me. Clara wanted to argue, wanted to say she wouldn't hide while others fought, but June was wailing in her arms and she knew what she had to do. I promise, she whispered. Rowan's hand touched her cheek, just for a moment, a gesture so tender it made her heart crack. Then he was gone, moving back to the window where Santos was already firing measured shots at the approaching riders. Maggie pulled Clara toward the kitchen, lifted a rug to reveal a trapdoor. Down here. There's blankets, water, enough air for a few hours. Stay quiet no matter what. Clara descended the ladder into darkness, June still crying against her shoulder. Above her, Maggie's face appeared in the opening. I love you, Clara. You and June both. Then the trapdoor closed, and Clara was alone in the dark with her screaming daughter and the sound of gunfire overhead. The root cellar smelled of earth and potatoes and fear. Clara sat in the darkness with her back against the dirt wall, rocking June and murmuring wordless sounds of comfort that did nothing to stop the baby's terrified crying. Above them, the gunfire was constant now. Sharp cracks from inside the house answered by the deeper boom of rifles outside, punctuated by shouted orders she couldn't quite make out. She pressed her hand gently over June's mouth, trying to muffle the sound, hating herself for it even as she knew it was necessary. If Kincaid's men got into the house, if they heard a baby crying from beneath the floor, everything Rowan and the others were fighting for would be lost. Shh, baby girl, Clara whispered against June's hair. Please, please be quiet. Mama's here. Mama's got you. June's cries subsided to hiccuping whimpers. Whether from exhaustion or some infant instinct that understood danger, Clara couldn't tell. In the brief quiet, she could hear voices more clearly. South window! That was Thomas, his voice strained. 3 of them trying to reach the barn! The crack of a rifle, then Santos shouting something in Spanish. More shots, closer now. The thunder of boots on the wooden floor above Clara's head made dirt rain down from the cellar ceiling. They're trying to flank us, Rowan's voice sharp with urgency. Maggie, watch the back door. Clara's heart seized. Maggie was up there, fighting alongside the men, while Clara hid in the dark like a coward. But she knew, God help her, she knew that this was where she needed to be. June couldn't fight. June needed her mother alive and hidden and ready to run if everything fell apart. A tremendous crash shook the house, followed by Maggie's scream. Clara bit down on her own fist to keep from crying out, her whole body tensing. What had happened? Was Maggie hurt? Was she... I'm all right, Maggie's voice came, shaken but alive. They threw something through the window, but I'm all right. They're trying to smoke us out, Thomas shouted. Santos, the water barrel! The sound of running feet, of water splashing, the acrid smell of smoke began seeping through the floorboards, and Clara pulled her shawl up to cover June's nose and mouth. The baby whimpered, but didn't cry out, her dark eyes wide in the dim light that filtered through the cracks above. Time became meaningless in the cellar. Clara counted her heartbeats, counted June's breaths, counted the shots being fired, and tried to calculate how much ammunition they must have left. Not enough. Never enough against 30 men. Then she heard a new sound. Hoofbeats, many of them, approaching fast from the east. Her first thought was reinforcements for Kincaid, that they were truly lost now. But then she heard Thomas's whoop of joy. It's Morrison! He's brought help! Morrison's place wasn't burning, Rowan's voice filled with fierce satisfaction. Kincaid's men just lit a brush fire on the ridge to make it look that way from here. Morrison spotted the trick and came straight back. The gunfire intensified, but it had changed character. Now it came from multiple directions, and Clara could hear shouting from outside that sounded confused, disorganized. Kincaid's men were caught between the house and Morrison's group, and they didn't like it. They're pulling back, Santos called out. The cowards! They run! But even as hope flared in Clara's chest, she heard Garrett Kincaid's voice rising above the chaos, closer than any voice should be. Forget them! Get to the house! Get the woman and the baby! That's all we need! Clara's blood turned to ice. They were coming for her specifically, and they knew she was here. Her hand tightened on June, pulling her daughter closer, and she looked desperately around the cellar for anything she could use as a weapon. A rusted shovel leaned in one corner, and she grabbed it with her free hand, knowing it would be useless, but needing something, anything. Above her, she heard the sound of splintering wood. The back door, she realized. They'd managed to break through the back door while everyone was focused on the front. Back door, Maggie screamed. Thomas, they're inside! The gunfight moved into the house itself. Clara could hear boots pounding on the floor directly above her, could hear the grunts and curses of men fighting hand to hand. Something heavy crashed to the floor, shaking dust loose from the ceiling. June started crying again, louder this time, and Clara knew with sick certainty that they would hear her. The trapdoor shook as someone stepped on the rug above it. Clara pressed herself into the corner, holding the shovel in one trembling hand and June in the other, and prayed harder than she'd ever prayed in her life. Check under that rug, Garrett's voice so close. She's got to be here somewhere. Garrett! Rowan's shout, followed by the sound of a fist connecting with flesh. You want her, you go through me first. They were fighting directly above the trapdoor now. Clara could hear every impact, every grunt of pain. She heard Rowan curse, heard the thud of a body hitting the floor. Then Garrett's voice again, breathless and enraged. You're done, Hale. This valley's done. My father's going to burn every homestead to the ground, and there's nothing you can do to... His words cut off with a choking sound. Clara heard a scuffle, then Rowan's voice, low and deadly. You tell your father this. He comes near Clara or that baby again, I'll kill him myself. You understand me? I don't care about consequences. I don't care about the law. He touches them. He dies. You're a dead man, Garrett wheezed. You're all dead. Maybe, but you first. A thump, the sound of someone being shoved hard. Now get out of here before I change my mind about letting you live. Boots stumbling toward the door. Then Thomas's voice calling from outside. They're retreating, all of them heading back toward Double K land. The shooting stopped. In the sudden quiet, Clara could hear her own ragged breathing, could hear June's whimpers subsiding to exhausted hiccups. She didn't move, didn't dare believe it was over, until she heard Rowan's voice directly above her. Clara, it's safe now. You can come up. The trapdoor lifted and light flooded the cellar. Rowan's face appeared in the opening, streaked with blood and soot, a cut above his left eye bleeding freely. But he was alive, and the look on his face when he saw her and June was worth every moment of terror in that dark hole. "Thank God," he breathed. He reached down, and Clara took his hand, letting him pull her up with June clutched to her chest. When she emerged into the kitchen, she saw the devastation: broken windows, bullet holes in the walls, the back door hanging off its hinges. Maggie sat at the table with a bloody cloth pressed to her arm, while Santos and Thomas checked the perimeter with rifles still at the ready. "Maggie!" Clara rushed to her sister. "You're hurt!" "Just a graze," Maggie said, though her face was pale. "Bullet caught my arm when I was reloading. I've had worse." "No, you haven't," Thomas said, coming back inside. His face was grim as he knelt beside his wife. "That needs proper doctoring, Maggie. It needs a bandage and some whiskey, and I'll be fine." Maggie's voice was firm, but her hand shook as she pressed the cloth tighter. "We all need to focus on what comes next. Kincaid's men ran, but they'll regroup. They'll come back with more men, more guns." "Maybe not," Rowan said. He crossed to the broken window and looked out at the yard. Morrison's men captured 3 of Kincaid's hands. One of them's already talking, saying Garrett ordered the attack directly. That's enough for Marshal Briggs to arrest him. Maybe arrest Dawson, too, if we can prove he gave the orders. "Will it stick?" Thomas asked. "Or will they lawyer their way out of it like they always do?" "Depends on how many people are willing to testify." Rowan turned back to face them, and Clara saw something new in his eyes. Not just determination, but hope. That meeting this morning, it changed something. People stood up. They spoke out. That's harder to silence than a few isolated complaints. Santos appeared in the doorway, dragging one of Kincaid's captured men by the collar. The man's face was bloody, his eyes darting nervously between the people in the kitchen. "This one, he says he has information," Santos announced. "Says he will trade it for his freedom." "No deals," Thomas said flatly. "He attacked my home, threatened my family." "Wait," Rowan held up a hand. "What kind of information?" The captured man swallowed hard. "I know where Garrett is planning to go. He's got a backup plan, see? If the attack on this place failed, he was supposed to head to town and grab the Territorial Records Office. Steal the land deeds for every homestead in the valley. Without those deeds, you can't prove ownership. Kincaid figures he can claim all the land as abandoned." Clara felt sick. Can he do that? Can he just steal the deeds? "If he destroys them and there's no copies, it becomes a legal nightmare," Rowan said. "Could tie up the courts for years. Meanwhile, he moves his cattle onto the land, builds his own structures, establishes possession. By the time it gets sorted out, the small ranchers will be broke and scattered." "We have to stop him," Maggie said, trying to stand. She swayed, and Thomas caught her. "You're not going anywhere," Thomas said firmly. "Santos, you and I will ride for town. Warn them what's coming." "No." Rowan's voice cut through the discussion. "Santos stays here to protect the women. You and I ride for town, but we split up. You take the direct route, raise the alarm, get as many armed men as you can. I'll take the ridge trail. It's faster if you know it. I can get there first, get to the records office before Garrett does." "That's a hard ride alone," Thomas warned. "And if Garrett's got men with him, then I deal with them." Rowan checked his rifle, his movements methodical. "Clara, I need you to write something for me. Quick as you can." Clara found paper and pencil amid the chaos and sat at the table. "What do you need?" "A statement. Everything that's happened since the flood. How you got here. What Kincaid's men have done. What you heard Garrett say today. Sign it and date it. If something happens to me, that's evidence for the marshal." "Nothing's going to happen to you," Clara said, but her hand shook as she wrote. Rowan moved to check his saddlebags, and Maggie caught Clara's eye, tilting her head meaningfully toward him. Clara understood. She finished the statement, signed it, and followed Rowan out to where Thunder waited by the corral. "Rowan," she said quietly, "you don't have to do this. Thomas and Santos could—" "Thomas needs to stay with Maggie, make sure she gets proper medical attention. And Santos needs to stay here in case any of Kincaid's men double back." Rowan tightened Thunder's girth, not looking at her. "This is my choice, Clara. I'm making it." "Why?" The word burst out of her. Why are you risking everything for people you barely know? For my sister's land? For her fight?" Rowan's spot distilled on the saddle. For a long moment he didn't answer. Then he turned to face her, and his gray eyes held something raw and painful. "You want the truth? I'm not doing it for the land or even for your sister." His voice was rough. "I'm doing it because when I pulled you and June out of that water, something in me woke up. Something I thought died with Maria and Christopher. I started caring again. Started feeling like maybe life was worth fighting for instead of just surviving." He took a breath. "And I'm doing it because if Garrett Kincaid gets those deeds, he wins. He gets everything. Your sister's land, the spring, control of the valley, and you and June? You'll have nowhere safe to go. I can't let that happen." Clara stepped closer, close enough to see the cuts and bruises on his face, the exhaustion in his eyes. "Then come back," she said fiercely. "You fight, you stop Garrett, and you come back. Because June needs you, and—" She stopped, surprised by the tears on her cheeks. "And I need you." Rowan's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing away her tears. "I'll come back," he said. "I promise." Then he kissed her. It was brief, just a brush of lips, but it felt like a vow. When he pulled back and swung into the saddle, Clara saw the determination in his face and believed him. He would come back. He had to. She stood watching as he rode out, Thunder's hooves throwing up dust as they disappeared over the ridge. Thomas left minutes later by the main road, and then it was just Clara, Maggie, Santos, and the 3 captured Kincaid men tied up in the barn. "Come inside," Santos said gently. "We wait now. We prepare in case they come back, and we wait." The next hours were agony. Santos positioned himself at the front window with his rifle, watching the approaches. Maggie finally allowed Clara to properly clean and bandage her wound, though she insisted it was nothing serious. The captured men sat sullenly in the barn, guarded by the promise that if they made trouble, Santos would shoot them without hesitation. June slept through it all, exhausted by the day's chaos, and Clara envied her daughter's innocent oblivion. She tried to keep busy, cleaning up broken glass, boarding over shattered windows, salvaging what she could of the damage. But her mind was in town with Rowan, imagining every possible disaster. It was nearly sunset when they heard hoofbeats approaching from the north. Santos tensed, bringing his rifle up, but then he relaxed. "It is Morrison and the others," he said. "They return." Morrison and 5 other riders came into the yard, their faces showing exhaustion, but also satisfaction. Morrison dismounted and approached the porch where Clara and Maggie waited. "Marshal Briggs was at my place when we got back," he said. "The fire was just brush burning on the ridge like Rowan figured. We told him what happened here and he's gathering a posse. Says this is attempted murder, arson, assault, enough charges to put Garrett Kincaid away for 20 years. "Did Rowan make it to town?" Clara asked, unable to keep the fear from her voice. Morrison's expression grew troubled. "Don't know, ma'am. Thomas arrived about an hour ago, said Rowan took the ridge trail, but nobody's seen him come in yet, and we've been there since then." Clara's heart sank. The ridge trail was faster, Morrison had said. Rowan should have arrived before Thomas. If he wasn't there yet— "The ridge trail has ambush points," Santos said quietly. "If Garrett suspected someone might try to beat him to town, he might have left men to watch that route." "We need to go after him," Clara said immediately. "No." Santos's voice was firm. "You stay here where you are safe. I will go, and I will find him." "Santos, you can't." "I can, and I will. That boy, he saved my life 5 years ago when I had nowhere to go and everyone thought I was too old to be useful. I will not abandon him now." Santos checked his rifle and moved toward his horse. "Morrison, you and your men stay here. Protect the women. I will bring Rowan back, or I will not come back at all." He rode out before anyone could argue further, and Clara felt a new fear settle in her chest. Now both men she'd come to care about were in danger, and she was stuck here helpless, waiting. Maggie touched her arm. "They'll be all right. Both of them. They're tough, and they're smart." "You don't know that," Clara whispered. "No," Maggie admitted, "but I have to believe it. We both do. Because the alternative is—" She didn't finish, but she didn't need to. Clara knew what the alternative was. She'd already lost one man she loved. Losing 2 more might break her entirely. Night fell, and still no word. Morrison's men took turns standing watch while the others rested in the barn. Inside the house, Maggie finally fell into an exhausted sleep, her bandaged arm cradled against her chest. Clara sat at the kitchen table with June on her lap, watching the darkness through the window and trying not to imagine all the terrible possibilities. It was near midnight when she heard it. A single horse, moving fast, coming from the direction of town. Clara was on her feet instantly, June clutched to her chest. Morrison appeared from the barn, rifle ready. The rider burst into the yard, and in the moonlight Clara recognized Thomas. He dismounted before his horse had fully stopped, his face urgent. "Where's Maggie?" he demanded. "Inside, sleeping. Thomas, what happened? Did you find—" "Rowan made it to town," Thomas said, and Clara nearly collapsed with relief. "But barely. Garrett had 2 men waiting on the ridge trail. They ambushed him, shot thunder out from under him. Rowan killed one and wounded the other, then ran the last 3 miles to town on foot." "Is he—" Clara couldn't finish the question. "He's alive. Beat up pretty bad, took a bullet through his shoulder, but alive. He got to the records office just as Garrett was trying to break in. They fought in the street, Rowan half dead on his feet and Garrett with 6 men backing him up. But the townspeople came out, saw what was happening. Hardware store owner brought a shotgun, blacksmith brought a hammer, even the preacher came out with his Bible and his righteousness." Thomas grinned despite the gravity of the situation. Garrett backed down when he realized the whole town was against him. Marshal Briggs arrested him on the spot. "And Rowan?" Clara asked. "Where is he now?" "Doctor's place, getting stitched up. He sent me to tell you he kept his promise. He came back. Santos is with him. They'll both be here by morning if the doctor clears Rowan to ride." Clara sank into a chair, shaking with relief. June stirred in her arms but didn't wake. Thomas knelt beside her, his face kind. "He's going to be all right, Clara. And because of what he did tonight, we have evidence. We have witnesses. We have Garrett in custody and charges pending against Dawson. This isn't over, but we're finally winning." That night, Clara dreamed of floods and gunfire and gray eyes that promised safety. She woke at dawn to find Maggie already up, moving stiffly but determinedly around the kitchen making coffee. Through the window, Clara could see Morrison's men preparing to leave, their job done. "Any sign of them?" Clara asked. Maggie shook her head. "Not yet, but Thomas said by morning, and it's barely past dawn. Give them time." Time crawled by. Clara fed June, changed her, walked circles around the small house with her daughter on her hip. Every sound made her jump, every shadow made her look up hopefully. Maggie watched with sympathetic eyes but said nothing. It was mid-morning when Santos finally appeared on the horizon, riding his paint mare with a second horse trailing behind. As they got closer, Clara saw Rowan slumped in the second saddle, his left arm in a makeshift sling, his face pale beneath several days' worth of beard. Clara handed June to Maggie and ran out to meet them. Santos pulled up first, dismounting with a groan. "He insisted on coming," Santos said tiredly. "The doctor, he said to rest for 3 days minimum. But Rowan, he said he made a promise." Rowan dismounted carefully, favoring his wounded shoulder. When his boots hit the ground, he swayed, and Clara was there instantly, steadying him. "You idiot," she said, her voice thick with tears. "You should have stayed in town, rested properly." "Had to make sure you were safe," Rowan said. His voice was rough, exhausted. "Had to see with my own eyes." "Well, you can see now. We're safe. June's safe. Everyone's safe because of you." Clara looked up at his bruised face, at the bandage visible beneath his torn shirt, at the exhaustion in his eyes. "Now come inside before you fall down." She guided him into the house, Santos following with their saddlebags. Maggie took one look at Rowan and immediately began heating water for tea, pulling out bandages for a proper dressing change. Thomas, who'd ridden in earlier, helped Rowan into a chair. "You're a damn fool, Hale," Thomas said, but there was affection in his voice. "Could have gotten yourself killed." "Worth it," Rowan said simply. His eyes found Clara's across the kitchen. "All worth it." The next few days passed in a strange limbo. Rowan recovered slowly, his shoulder healing, though it would leave another scar to match the one through his eyebrow. Marshal Briggs came and went, taking statements, building his case. More of Kincaid's men came forward, willing to testify now that Garrett was in custody, and it looked like the law might actually win for once. Dawson Kincaid himself was arrested on the 4th day. Marshal Briggs rode out to the Double K with 10 deputies and brought him back in chains. The old man's face was thunderous, but he went quietly, already no doubt planning his legal defense. "It'll go to trial," Marshal Briggs told them. "Could take months, but we've got solid evidence, multiple witnesses, and 2 of Kincaid's own men who've turned state's evidence. I think we can make it stick." "And in the meantime?" Thomas asked. "In the meantime, everyone stays alert. Kincaid still has men loyal to him, and they might try something stupid. But with both Kincaids in custody, most of the hands are drifting off, looking for work elsewhere. The Double K is falling apart from the inside." It was strange, Clara thought, how quickly life tried to return to normal. The broken windows were repaired. The back door was rehung. Maggie's arm healed, though she'd have a scar. The valley settled into an uneasy peace, everyone waiting to see what would happen next. Through it all, Clara found herself watching Rowan. He'd stayed at the Duncan homestead to recover, sleeping in the barn with Santos, taking his meals at the house. Every day he grew stronger, and every day Clara felt her heart pulling toward him more insistently. She caught him one evening sitting on the porch, June asleep in his arms. He'd taken to holding the baby whenever Clara would let him, rocking her gently and humming tuneless songs. The sight of this scarred, dangerous man cradling her daughter with such tenderness never failed to make Clara's throat tight. "She likes you," Clara said softly, sitting beside him. "The feeling's mutual." Rowan's voice was fond as he looked down at June's sleeping face. "She reminds me of Christopher sometimes, the way she grabs my finger, the way she laughs." It was the first time he'd spoken his son's name where Clara could hear. She held very still, afraid to break the moment. "He would have been 8 now," Rowan continued quietly. "Sometimes I wonder what he would have been like. Would he have wanted to be a rancher like me? Or would he have wanted something different? Would he have been tall or short, serious or funny?" He swallowed hard. "I'll never know." "Tell me about him," Clara said. "About Christopher. About Maria." So he did. In the gathering darkness, with June sleeping between them, Rowan told Clara about his wife who'd loved to garden, who'd sung Mexican ballads while she cooked, who'd been fierce and loving in equal measure. He told her about Christopher, who'd been afraid of horses until the day he wasn't, who'd wanted to be just like his papa, who'd died calling for water with a fever that wouldn't break. "I'm sorry," Clara whispered when he finished. "I'm so sorry, Rowan. So am I. Sorry you lost Daniel. Sorry you had to go through that alone." He looked at her, his gray eyes reflecting the first stars. "But I'm not sorry the flood brought you here. Does that make me a terrible person?" "No," Clara said. "It makes you human." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the valley. Finally, Rowan spoke again. "I'm going back to my ranch in a few days. Santos and I need to check the herd, repair the damage from Kincaid's raids, but Clara..." He stopped, seeming to gather his courage. "I'd like to come back, to visit, if that would be all right with you." "Of course it would be all right," Clara said. Her heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. "We'd like that. June and I both." "Good." Rowan's hand found hers in the darkness, his calloused fingers intertwining with hers. "That's good." Inside, through the window, Clara could see Maggie and Thomas moving about the kitchen, their shadows merging as they embraced. She thought about what Maggie had said weeks ago, about not confusing safety with love. But looking at Rowan now, feeling his hand in hers and June sleeping peacefully in his arms, Clara realized maybe they weren't as separate as Maggie thought. Maybe safety was love. Maybe love was finding someone who'd dive into a flood for you, who'd ride into danger to protect what you held dear, who'd hold your baby like she was precious while telling you about the child he'd lost. Maybe this was what hope felt like after grief, tentative and new, but real. The trial of Dawson and Garrett Kincaid began 6 weeks later, and it was the talk of the entire territory. Witnesses came from all over the valley to testify, ranchers telling of rustled cattle and burned barns, families describing threats and violence, even some of Kincaid's own former men admitting to crimes they'd committed under orders. Clara testified too, standing in front of the judge and jury and recounting everything that had happened since the flood. She described Garrett's attack on the Duncan homestead, his attempt to steal the land deeds, his threats against her and June. When she finished, the courtroom was silent. The verdict came after 3 days of deliberation. Garrett Kincaid was found guilty on multiple counts: attempted murder, arson, conspiracy, theft. He was sentenced to 20 years in the territorial prison. Dawson Kincaid, as the architect of the schemes, received 25 years. The day the verdict was announced, the valley erupted in celebration. Families that had been living in fear for years finally breathed easy. The Double K Ranch was seized and divided up, sold off to pay restitution to those Kincaid had harmed. Thomas Duncan bought back the cattle that had been stolen from his neighbors. Bill Weatherby reclaimed his lost herd. And through it all, Rowan kept his promise. He came to visit every week, riding the 25 miles from his ranch to the Duncan homestead and back. Sometimes he brought Santos, who'd become June's favorite person after her mother. Sometimes he came alone. On those solo visits, he and Clara would walk by the spring while Maggie watched June, and they would talk about their lost spouses, about their hopes and fears, about what the future might hold. The conversations were easy and hard in equal measure, but they were honest, and they were healing. "I think Maria would have liked you," Rowan said one afternoon as they sat by the water. "She always said I needed someone who'd challenge me, who wouldn't let me be stubborn for stubborn's sake." "And Daniel would have liked you," Clara replied. "He always said I needed someone strong, someone who could keep up with me." "Think they'd approve?" Rowan asked quietly. "Of this? Of us?" Clara thought about it seriously. "I think they'd want us to be happy, and I think—" She paused, surprised by her own certainty. "I think I could be happy with you, Rowan. Not right away, not tomorrow, but someday." "Someday works for me," Rowan said. He took her hand and they sat watching the spring bubble up from the earth, clear and constant and life-giving. 3 months after the trial, on a crisp November morning, Marshal Briggs rode out to the Duncan homestead with news. The territorial governor had issued a formal apology to all the families affected by Kincaid's crimes. Compensation would be paid. Protection would be guaranteed. The valley was officially safe again. That night, Thomas organized a celebration. Families from all over came: the Morrisons, the Chens, the Hoffmans, old Bill Weatherby, and dozens more. They gathered in the Duncan yard with food and music, celebrating not just the governor's decree but their own survival, their own courage, in standing together when it mattered most. Clara stood on the porch holding June, watching the festivities, when she felt a presence beside her. Rowan had arrived late, straight from his ranch, still dusty from the ride. "Sorry I'm late," he said. "Had a fence break this morning. Took longer to fix than I expected." "You're here now," Clara said. "That's what matters." June saw Rowan and immediately reached for him, making her demanding baby sounds. Rowan laughed and took her, settling her on his hip with the ease of long practice. "Getting big, aren't you, little one?" he said to June. "Soon you'll be running around, getting into everything." "She loves you," Clara said softly. Rowan looked at her, and something in his expression made Clara's breath catch. "I love her too," he said. "And Clara, I love you." The words hung in the air between them, simple and profound. Clara felt tears prick her eyes, but they were good tears this time, healing tears. "I love you too," she whispered. "I didn't think I could again, after Daniel. But I do." "Marry me," Rowan said. It wasn't a question, not exactly, but not quite a demand either. "Not tomorrow, not next week, but when you're ready. Marry me and bring June to the ranch. Let me be her father, let me be your husband. Let me spend the rest of my life making sure you both know you're loved." Clara's answer caught in her throat, choked by emotion. Instead, she reached up and pulled him down into a kiss, careful of the baby between them. June laughed, delighted by whatever game the adults were playing. When they pulled apart, Rowan was smiling, really smiling, the kind of smile that reached his eyes and made him look years younger. "I'll take that as a yes," he said. "Yes," Clara confirmed, laughing through her tears. "Yes, when I'm ready. Yes to all of it." They married in February, 5 months after the flood that had brought them together. It was a small ceremony at the Duncan homestead, with Santos as Rowan's best man and Maggie as Clara's witness. June, nearly a year old now and trying to walk, stumbled around in a new dress Maggie had sewn, charming everyone who looked at her. The preacher who married them was the same one who'd faced down Garrett Kincaid with a Bible in the street that night. He spoke about how God worked in mysterious ways, how tragedy could lead to blessing, how love found in the aftermath of loss was no less real than any other love. When he pronounced them husband and wife, Rowan kissed Clara with such tenderness that half the congregation wiped their eyes. Then he scooped up June, who'd been tugging at his pants leg, and kissed her forehead too. "My girls," he said quietly, just for them to hear. "My family." They moved to Rowan's ranch the next week, Santos helping to transport their meager belongings. The ranch house felt huge after the close quarters they'd been living in, but Rowan was already talking about building an addition, making it bigger for the family he hoped they'd grow. Santos moved into his own small cabin on the property, finally having a space that was truly his. He spent his days working the ranch with Rowan and his evenings carving toys for June, who called him Papa Santos and followed him everywhere. Life settled into new rhythms. Clara learned to run a ranch house, to cook for working men, to manage chickens and gardens and all the 1,000 tasks that came with frontier living. June grew strong and healthy, learning to walk and then to run, her laughter echoing through the house and bringing it alive in ways it hadn't been in 5 years. And Rowan bloomed. The hard edges softened. The grief-haunted eyes grew clear. He laughed more, smiled more, lived more. He taught June to love horses, to respect the land, to be brave and kind in equal measure. He held Clara at night and whispered promises about the future they were building together. One evening, nearly a year after their wedding, Clara found him on the porch watching the sunset. She settled beside him, leaning into his warmth. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "The flood," Rowan said. "That day I saw your wagon in the water. I almost didn't go in, you know. For a second I thought about riding past, staying out of it. 5 years of grief had taught me that getting involved only brought pain." "What changed your mind?" "I saw June. Just a glimpse of her in your arms, and I thought, I can't let another child die. Not if there's any chance." He turned to look at Clara, his gray eyes warm in the fading light. "I thought I was saving you that day. But looking back, I think maybe you saved me." "We saved each other," Clara said simply. Inside, they could hear June's excited chatter as Santos played with her before bedtime. The sound made Rowan smile, that full, genuine smile that Clara had come to treasure. "You know what the best part is?" Rowan said. "I get to keep saving you every day, and you get to keep saving me. That's what love is, I think. Just saving each other, over and over, in all the small ways." Clara didn't answer with words. She just took his hand and held it, and together they watched the sun sink below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, the same sky that had been dark with storm clouds the day of the flood, the same land that had seemed so dangerous and unforgiving. But everything looked different now. Everything was different. A cowboy had dove from his horse into raging water, and in doing so, had changed 3 lives forever. He'd saved a mother and child from drowning, yes, but more than that, he'd saved them from a future of fear and loneliness. And they, in turn, had saved him from a past that would have consumed him. Sometimes the worst storms, Clara thought, brought the greatest blessings. Sometimes you had to nearly lose everything to find what truly mattered. And sometimes, just sometimes, love found you in the most unexpected places, in the chaos of disaster and the quiet moments after. As the stars began to appear overhead, Clara squeezed Rowan's hand and felt him squeeze back. Whatever came next, drought or prosperity, hardship or ease, they would face it together. A family forged by fire and flood, and the simple courage of not giving up. And that, Clara thought, was worth every moment of fear she'd endured in that flood. Worth every tear she'd cried for Daniel. Worth every hard mile that had brought her to this porch, this man, this life. It was worth everything. The seasons turned, and with them came the steady rhythm of ranch life that Clara had never imagined she'd find comforting. Spring brought the birth of new calves and the backbreaking work of branding. Summer meant long days in the garden and longer evenings on the porch, watching June chase fireflies while Santos told stories in his melodic Spanish-accented English. Fall arrived with the cattle drive to market and the satisfaction of a good price that would see them through the winter. But it was on an October morning, exactly 1 year after the flood, that everything came full circle. Clara woke to find Rowan's side of the bed empty and cool. She rose, checked on June, still sleeping soundly in her small bed, and padded through the house looking for her husband. She found him on the porch, coffee in hand, staring toward the eastern horizon where the sun was just beginning to paint the sky. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked softly, settling beside him with her shawl wrapped tight against the morning chill. "Been thinking," Rowan said, "about what day it is." Clara had been thinking about it too. 1 year ago today, she'd been in a wagon with Tom Breslin, heading toward an uncertain future. 1 year ago today, the flood had come. "Do you want to go?" she asked. "To the creek, I mean. To see it?" Rowan looked at her with surprise. "I wasn't sure you'd want to. Might bring back bad memories." "It'll bring back all kinds of memories," Clara said. "But I think I need to see it. Need to see that it's just a creek now, not a monster. Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense." Rowan squeezed her hand. "We'll go this morning. All of us. Make it a family trip." Santos was enthusiastic about the idea when they told him over breakfast. June, now walking confidently and chattering in half-formed words, seemed to sense something important was happening and kept tugging at Clara's skirts with excited babbling. They packed a picnic lunch and set out mid-morning, the four of them on horseback with June riding in front of Rowan on Thunder. The big bay stallion had fully recovered from the gunshot wound he'd taken on the ridge trail, though, like his master, he bore new scars. Clara rode a gentle mare Rowan had bought for her, while Santos brought up the rear on his faithful Paint. The ride to Winding Creek took 2 hours. As they approached the valley, Clara felt her chest tighten with remembered fear. But when they crested the rise and looked down, she saw only beauty. Golden grass swaying in the breeze, cottonwood trees still holding their autumn leaves, and cutting through it all, a peaceful ribbon of water that sparkled in the sunlight. "It's so small," Clara said wonderingly. "How could something so small have been so terrifying?" "Because it wasn't small that day," Rowan said quietly. "That day it was a monster, just like you said. But today it's just a creek again. That's the nature of flash floods. They come and go, leaving everything changed." They rode down to the water's edge, to the stretch where Rowan estimated the wagon had been when he'd seen it. The sandbar where they'd collapsed, exhausted and alive, was still there, though smaller now. The cottonwoods bore the scars of that day, broken branches, high water marks on the trunks. But they'd survived, as had everything else. Santos spread a blanket on the grass while Clara unpacked their lunch. June immediately toddled toward the water, and Rowan scooped her up before she could get her feet wet. "Not so fast, little one," he said, bouncing her on his hip. "Water's cold this time of year." But he carried her closer, let her touch the water with her fingers, watched her laugh at the way it moved. Clara joined them, standing at the creek's edge with her family, and felt something shift inside her, a final releasing of the terror she'd carried. "Thank you," she said to the creek, surprising herself, "for bringing us here, for bringing us to him." "You're thanking the thing that almost killed you?" Santos asked, but there was understanding in his voice. "I'm thanking the thing that brought us together," Clara said. "All of us. If the flood hadn't happened, I'd still be heading to Maggie's, and Rowan would still be alone, and none of this—" She gestured at her family, at the life they'd built. "None of this would exist." "She's got a point," Rowan said. He set June down carefully, keeping hold of her hand, and wrapped his other arm around Clara's waist. "Everything good in my life right now came from the worst day of yours." Strange how that works. They ate lunch on the blanket, June demolishing her food with the enthusiastic messiness of a toddler, while Santos regaled them with stories of floods he'd seen in Sonora as a boy. The sun climbed higher, warming the air, and Clara felt herself relaxing completely for the first time since they'd arrived. After lunch, while June napped on the blanket with Santos watching over her, Rowan took Clara's hand and led her upstream, away from the others. "There's something I want to show you," he said. They walked for perhaps 10 minutes, following the creek's gentle curve, until Rowan stopped at a bend where a massive boulder sat half in the water, creating a small pool. "This is where I was when I heard the flood coming," he said quietly. "I'd been tracking a mountain lion all morning, lost the trail here. I was about to head home when I heard the roar. By the time I got back to where I could see the valley, the water was already rising." Clara looked at the boulder, at the peaceful pool, trying to imagine Rowan standing here a year ago, unaware that his life was about to change. "What made you look?" she asked. "What made you ride toward the danger instead of away from it?" Instinct, maybe, or maybe something more. Rowan picked up a flat stone and skipped it across the pool. Santos says it was fate. Says Maria sent me to that exact spot at that exact time because she knew you needed help, knew June needed a father. I don't know if I believe that, but I like the idea of it. I believe it, Clara said firmly. I have to believe that Daniel and Maria are somewhere, watching over us, happy that we found each other. Otherwise it all feels too random, too cruel. They stood in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the water. Then Rowan said, I've been thinking about something, about expanding the ranch. Expanding how? Well, the house first. June needs a proper room, not just a corner of ours. And maybe, he paused, looking almost shy, maybe room for more children, if God sees fit to bless us that way. Clara's hand went instinctively to her stomach. She hadn't told him yet, had wanted to be sure, but the signs were all there. She was almost certainly pregnant, probably about 6 weeks along. Rowan, she said softly. About that, his eyes widened as he understood. Clara, are you? I think so. I'm not certain yet, but I think so. Rowan let out a whoop that probably scared every animal within a mile and swept her into his arms, spinning her around. When he set her down, his face was radiant with joy. Are you happy? Clara asked, suddenly nervous. I know it's soon, and we haven't really talked about... Happy? Rowan cupped her face in his hands. Clara, I'm more than happy. I'm grateful and blessed and terrified and excited all at once. A baby, our baby. Christopher's brother or sister, Clara said gently, and watched Rowan's eyes fill with tears. Yeah, he said roughly. Yeah, that too. He'd have been a good big brother. He'll still be one, Clara said, just from heaven instead of here. And June will be a wonderful big sister right here on earth. They held each other for a long moment, there by the creek that had changed everything, and Clara felt the last piece of her heart that had remained locked away finally open. She'd been so afraid after Daniel died that she'd never feel complete again, never feel whole. But standing here with Rowan, carrying his child, with June and Santos waiting for them downstream, she realized she was more than whole. She was healed. When they returned to the blanket, Santos took one look at their faces and grinned knowingly. So, he said, when do I start carving toys for the new little one? How did you... Clara started, then laughed. Never mind. I should know by now you notice everything. June will need help, Santos said seriously, looking at the toddler who was just waking from her nap. Being a big sister is hard work, but I will teach her, just as I taught my own children. You never talk about your family, Rowan said. Your children in Sonora. Santos's expression grew wistful. I have 4 sons, 2 daughters. The eldest, Miguel, he would be 40 now. The youngest, Gabriela, she is 32. And between them, they have given me those 7 grandchildren I told you about, Clara. Maybe more by now. I have not had word in over a year. Why don't you go visit them? Clara asked gently. We could manage the ranch for a few months. You should see your family. And leave you when you are expecting? Santos shook his head. No, my place is here, helping with June and the new baby, maybe next year when things are settled. Santos, Rowan said seriously, go this winter, after the baby is born, after Clara is recovered. Take 2 months, 3 if you need it. Visit your children, meet your grandchildren. The ranch will be here when you get back. Santos's eyes gleamed with unshed tears. You would do this for me? Your family, Clara said simply. You've earned the right to see yours. They stayed by the creek until the afternoon shadows grew long, June playing in the grass while the adults talked and planned. They discussed the ranch expansion, debated names for the new baby, made lists of supplies they'd need before winter set in. It was comfortable and domestic and everything Clara had thought she'd lost when Daniel died. As they prepared to ride home, June in Rowan's arms and Clara mounting her mare, a thought struck her. Rowan, whatever happened to the mountain lion you were tracking that day? Never found it, Rowan said with a shrug. Lost the trail and never picked it up again. Why? Because if you'd caught it that morning, you wouldn't have been by the creek when the flood came. You wouldn't have heard it in time to help us." Clara smiled. "So I'm grateful to that mountain lion too, wherever it is." "Now you're being fanciful," Rowan teased, but his eyes were warm. "Maybe," Clara agreed, "but I've earned the right to be a little fanciful. Don't you think?" The ride home was peaceful, June dozing against Rowan's chest while the adults talked quietly. They arrived at the ranch just as the sun was setting, painting the adobe walls in shades of gold and amber. Clara looked at the house, their house, and felt a wave of contentment so strong it nearly took her breath away. This was home. Not the house in Tucson where she'd lived with Daniel, not Maggie's homestead where she'd planned to start over. This ranch, with its weathered barn and sturdy corrals and the man who'd saved her life. This was where she belonged. The next few months passed in a blur of preparation. Rowan and Santos worked on the house addition, building 2 new rooms, one for June and one for the baby. Thomas came over several weekends to help, bringing Maggie and their news. Maggie was expecting too, due about 3 months after Clara, and the sisters spent happy hours planning for their children who would grow up together. The trial of the Kincaids had concluded with both men sentenced to hard labor in the territorial prison. The Double K Ranch had been completely disbanded, its lands and cattle distributed to settle debts and pay restitution. The valley had settled into peace, small ranchers and homesteaders finally able to work their land without fear. Word had also come from Tucson that Tom Breslin's body had been found downstream, caught in some brush, and had been given a proper burial. Clara grieved for the kind man who'd died trying to get her to safety, and Rowan made sure a stone was placed on his grave with an inscription. He died protecting a mother and child. Christmas came, and with it a celebration at the ranch. Morrison and his family came, along with the Chens, the Hoffmans, and of course Thomas and Maggie. They crowded into the house, spilling out onto the porch despite the cold, sharing food and stories and laughter. June, overwhelmed by the attention, clung to Santos's legs until he picked her up and let her help him serve the tamales he'd made special for the occasion. "This," Clara said to Rowan as they watched the celebration from the doorway, "this is what I dreamed of when I was pregnant with June and alone in Tucson. Community, family, people who care." "You've got it now," Rowan said, his hand resting protectively on her swollen belly. "You've got all of it." The baby came in late February during a snowstorm that reminded Clara uncomfortably of the fever that had taken Maria and Christopher, but this time the outcome was different. This time the doctor arrived in plenty of time, and after 6 hours of labor, Clara delivered a healthy baby boy with a shock of dark hair and his father's gray eyes. "He's perfect," Rowan breathed, holding his son for the first time with hands that trembled. "Clara, he's perfect." "What should we name him?" Clara asked, exhausted but happy. Rowan was quiet for a long moment, looking down at the baby in his arms. "I was thinking, Daniel Christopher Hale, after both the fathers he'll never meet, but who made him possible?" Clara's eyes filled with tears. "It's perfect. He's perfect. Daniel Christopher Hale." June, allowed into the room to meet her new brother, approached cautiously. At 18 months old, she was full of opinions and energy, but she seemed to understand this was something special. She reached out one small finger and touched the baby's hand. "Baby," she said clearly, one of her few real words. "My baby." "Your brother," Clara corrected gently. "Can you say brother?" Buh, June attempted, then grinned proudly at getting close. Santos appeared in the doorway, his weathered face soft with emotion. "May an old man hold the new little one?" Rowan passed the baby carefully to Santos, who cradled him with the expertise of someone who'd held many babies in his long life. "Welcome, Daniel Christopher," he murmured. "You're born into a family that loves you, into a land that will make you strong. You're blessed, little one." Maggie and Thomas arrived the next day, bringing food and supplies and Maggie's fierce joy at meeting her new nephew. The 2 sisters sat together while Maggie held baby Daniel, and Clara felt a completeness she'd never expected to find. "Remember when we were girls?" Maggie said softly. "When we used to talk about having families of our own, houses next to each other, our children growing up together?" We're not quite next door, Clara said with a smile, but close enough. Closer than I thought we'd ever be after Daniel died, Maggie admitted. I was so scared for you, Clara. So scared you'd give up, that you'd stop living. And then the flood happened, and I was sure I'd lost you. Her voice broke. But instead, the flood brought you exactly where you needed to be. It brought me home, Clara said simply. True to his word, Rowan sent Santos to Sonora that spring. The old man protested, worried about leaving Clara with a newborn and a toddler, but Rowan was firm. You've earned this 100 times over, Rowan said. Go see your family. Meet your grandchildren. Come back when you're ready, and not a day before. Santos left in early April, promising to return by fall. The ranch felt emptier without him, but Clara and Rowan managed. They hired 2 hands to help with the cattle, local boys who were grateful for the steady work. June appointed herself her baby brother's protector, toddling after him whenever he cried and patting his head with surprising gentleness for a child so young. Summer brought good rains and better grass. The cattle thrived, and Rowan began talking about expanding the herd. Clara, recovered from childbirth and stronger than she'd been in years, threw herself into ranch life with enthusiasm. She learned to ride better, learned to shoot straight, learned to read the weather and the land. She became, she realized with some surprise, a true rancher's wife. It was in late July, as she was working in the garden while June helped by digging holes and Daniel slept in a basket nearby, that she heard riders approaching. Her hand went instinctively to the rifle she now kept within reach. Old habits died hard, even with the Kincaids in prison. But she relaxed when she recognized Santos's distinctive paint mare. But Santos wasn't alone. Behind him rode a younger man, perhaps 40, with Santos's bone structure and kind eyes. And behind him came a whole procession, more riders, a wagon, children ranging from teenagers to toddlers, women in bright shawls. Santos, Clara called, wiping her hands on her apron. You're back early, and you've brought... My family, Santos said, his face radiant with joy as he dismounted. Clara, this is my eldest son Miguel, his wife Rosa, their children, and my daughter Gabriela with her husband and their little ones, and, he gestured to the wagon, my other sons and their families. They have come to meet the people I have told them so much about. Rowan emerged from the barn, his face showing surprise and then delight. Santos, this is wonderful. They wanted to meet you, Santos explained. When I told them how you saved Clara and June, how you gave me a home when I needed one, how you sent me to visit them, they insisted on coming back with me, just for a few weeks, to say thank you properly. What followed was organized chaos. The Santos family descended on the ranch with warmth and energy and enough food to feed an army. They set up tents in the yard, cooked elaborate meals, played with June and Daniel with the ease of people who love children. Miguel helped Rowan with ranch work, showing him techniques he'd learned in Sonora. Rosa and Gabriela insisted on teaching Clara to make proper tortillas, laughing when her first attempts fell apart. You will learn, Rosa said kindly. These things, they take practice. One evening, as the extended family gathered around a bonfire in the yard, Santos pulled Clara and Rowan aside. I want to tell you something, he said seriously. My family, they have asked me to come back to Sonora. Miguel, he has a large ranch, and he wants me there to help teach the grandchildren, to spend my final years with them. Clara's heart sank. You're leaving? No, Santos said firmly. I told them thank you, but my place is here. With you, with Rowan, with June and Daniel. You are my family too, not by blood, but by choice, which is sometimes stronger. Santos, Rowan said, his voice rough with emotion. If you want to go, we'd understand. You've given us so much, and you have given me purpose when I thought my life was over, Santos interrupted. When Maria and Christopher died, I stayed because Rowan needed me. But now I stay because I want to. Because June calls me Papa Santos and Daniel will too. Because you have made me part of something good. He smiled. Besides, someone needs to teach these children how to be proper vaqueros. Miguel is very good, but I am better. They laughed and Clara hugged the old man fiercely. We're glad you're staying. So glad. The Santos family stayed for 3 weeks, and when they finally left, it was with promises to return the next year and the year after that. The ranch felt quiet after they'd gone, But it was a comfortable quiet, the quiet of a place that had been filled with love and laughter and would be again. As fall approached, Clara found herself standing one evening at the fence line, watching the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold. Rowan found her there, Daniel asleep against his shoulder while June played nearby with the wooden horse Santos had carved for her. "Penny for your thoughts," Rowan said softly. Clara leaned against him, careful not to disturb the sleeping baby. "I was thinking about the flood, about how terrified I was that day, how certain I was going to die, how wrong I was about what that day meant." "What did it mean?" "It meant the beginning, not the end, the beginning of this life, this family, the beginning of being happy again." She looked up at him. "I love Daniel with my whole heart, Rowan. I want you to know that. And I love you with my whole heart, too. They're different loves, but both real, both true." "I know," Rowan said quietly. "Just like I loved Maria and I love you. The heart's got room for all of it, the grief and the joy, the past and the present. Maria would want me to be happy, and Daniel would want the same for you." "They're watching over us," Clara said with certainty. "Daniel and Maria and Christopher. They sent us to each other." June toddled over, tugging at Clara's skirts. "Mama, look!" She held up a rock she'd found, presenting it like a treasure. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," Clara said, crouching down to admire it properly. "Should we add it to your collection?" June nodded enthusiastically and ran off to find more treasures. Clara straightened, watching her daughter disappear around the corner of the barn with Santos following at a discreet distance to make sure she didn't get into trouble. "She's so much like you," Rowan observed. "Stubborn, brave, full of life." "And Daniel is like you," Clara countered. "Those eyes. That serious expression when he's concentrating." "Poor kid," Rowan said with a laugh. "Let's hope he gets your good nature to balance out my stubbornness." They stood together as the sun sank lower, as the first stars appeared overhead, as June's excited voice floated back to them from wherever she'd wandered. Daniel stirred against Rowan's shoulder, made a small sound, and settled again. "You know what tomorrow is?" Clara asked suddenly. "Thursday? It's the anniversary of our first kiss. 1 year ago tomorrow, at Maggie's, the night before the town meeting." "Has it only been a year?" Rowan shook his head. "Feels like a lifetime." "It has been a lifetime," Clara said. "A whole new life, born from the worst day turned into the best thing that ever happened to us." A rider appeared on the horizon, and they both tensed automatically before recognizing Thomas. He rode into the yard with a wave, dismounting with news written all over his face. "You're not going to believe this," Thomas said without preamble. "Marshal Briggs was out at our place this afternoon. Garrett Kincaid died in prison last week, stabbed by another inmate. And Dawson..." He paused for effect. "Dawson had a heart attack 3 days ago, dead before they could get a doctor." Clara felt a complicated mix of emotions. Relief, certainly. With both Kincaids dead, the threat was truly over, but also sadness for lives wasted on greed and violence, for families destroyed by ambition. "So it's really over," Rowan said quietly. "The valley is finally free." "More than that," Thomas continued. "The territorial governor is sending a new land agent to reorganize the property records, make sure everyone's deeds are properly filed and protected. Says what happened here, the way the community stood together, should be a model for the whole territory." "Huh? That calls for a celebration," Santos declared, having returned with June in his arms. "Tomorrow, we have a feast. Invite all the neighbors. We celebrate the end of old troubles and the beginning of new peace." So they did. The next evening, the ranch filled with people once more. The Morrisons and their children, the Chens with their eldest son who was courting a girl from town, the Hoffmans with their new baby, old Bill Weatherby with his stories and his harmonica. Thomas and Maggie came with food and laughter, Maggie's belly round with the baby she'd deliver in a few months. They ate until they couldn't eat anymore, played music and danced in the yard, told stories as the stars wheeled overhead. June, allowed to stay up past her bedtime, fell asleep in Clara's arms while Rowan held Daniel and Santos played his guitar. "To new beginnings," Morrison proposed, raising his cup. "And to the cowboy who dove off his horse into a flood, saved a woman and a baby, and gave us all the courage to stand up for what's right." "To Rowan!" the crowd echoed, and Rowan ducked his head in embarrassment while Clara squeezed his hand. To all of us, Rowan corrected. To standing together, to family, however it comes to us. To surviving the floods and building something good from what's left behind. They drank to that, and to a dozen other toasts, until the fire burned low and families began gathering sleepy children for the ride home. As the last guest departed, Clara and Rowan stood on the porch with their children and Santos, watching the darkness settle over the land. "I've been thinking," Clara said into the comfortable quiet, "about the flood, about that day. And I realized something. I spent so much time afterward thinking about what we lost. Tom Breslin, everything in the wagon, the life I'd planned. But we gained so much more than we lost." "We gained everything," Rowan agreed softly. "So next year, on the anniversary of the flood, I want to go back to the creek, make it a tradition. Take June and Daniel, teach them the story of how their family began, not as a tragedy, but as a blessing, as the day everything changed for the better." "I like that," Rowan said. He shifted Daniel to his shoulder and wrapped his free arm around Clara. "The day I dove off thunder and into a new life." "The day you saved us," Clara added. "The day you saved me right back." They stood there for a long moment, a family born from disaster and forged in love. And Clara thought about how strange and wonderful life could be, how the worst moments could lead to the best outcomes, how loss could clear the way for new love, how a flash flood in Arizona territory could wash away one life and deliver another. June stirred in her arms, mumbled something in her sleep about horses, and settled again. Daniel made a small sound, and Rowan began to rock him gently. Santos played a soft melody on his guitar, something sweet and sad and hopeful all at once. And Clara, standing in the doorway of her home with her husband beside her and her children in her arms, felt peace settle into her bones. She'd survived the flood. She'd survived the grief. She'd survived the violence and fear and uncertainty. And now, on the other side of all that surviving, she was finally, truly living. The creek that had nearly killed her had instead delivered her to exactly where she needed to be, to this ranch, this man, this family, to a love she hadn't known she could feel again, to a life that made every struggle, every tear, every moment of terror worthwhile. Tomorrow they would wake and work the ranch. They would feed the animals and tend the garden and teach June her letters. They would watch Daniel grow and change. They would argue sometimes and laugh more often and hold each other through the hard nights when old griefs resurfaced. They would build a life together, day by day, choice by choice, moment by moment. But tonight, Clara thought, tonight they would simply be grateful. Grateful for floods that brought change, for cowboys who dove from horses, for the strange and winding path that had led them all to this porch, this moment, this perfect, imperfect life. She looked at Rowan, found him already looking at her, and smiled. No words were needed. They understood what they'd built, what they'd been given, what they'd fought for, and won. A family, a home, a future. And it had all started with a flood, a cowboy, and a mother's desperate prayer for salvation. Sometimes, Clara thought, prayers were answered in the most unexpected ways. Sometimes the thing that nearly destroyed you turned out to be the thing that saved you. Sometimes the end was really just the beginning. And sometimes, just sometimes, love found you in the chaos, pulled you from the water, and carried you home. "Come on," Rowan said softly, touching her cheek. "Let's get these little ones to bed. We've got a ranch to run in the morning and a lifetime to live." "A lifetime," Clara echoed, and let him lead her inside into the warmth and light and love that waited there. The door closed behind them, shutting out the darkness. And in the quiet that followed, if you listened very carefully, you might have heard the distant sound of water. Not the roar of a devastating flood, but the gentle murmur of winding creek, flowing peaceful and clear under the Arizona stars, bearing witness to the miracle it had made possible. A cowboy had dove from his horse. A baby had been saved. A family had been born. And they all lived, if not happily ever after, then at least contentedly, bravely, lovingly, for all the days that followed. The end.